I watched my daughter-in-law drop a white pill into my wife's drink right in the middle of the Christmas party. She smiled at the guests, shaking hands and accepting compliments, acting like the perfect hostess, completely unaware that I was watching her reflection in the hallway mirror. I did not scream. I did not cause a scene. I simply waited for her to turn her back to laugh at a joke, and then I quietly walked over and swapped the glasses. 10 minutes later, she raised a toast to my wife's health, looking me dead in the eye with a smirk. I raised my glass back and smiled, waiting for the poison she intended for the woman I love to hit her own bloodstream. And when her eyes rolled back and her knees buckled, I knew the war had just begun. My name is Isaiah Jefferson. I am 72 years old. If you think old men are helpless, you are about to learn a very hard lesson. Before I continue, please like and subscribe if you believe in protecting your family at all costs. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. The chandelier in my son Dante's foyer cost more than the first house I ever bought. It was crystal massive and threw light into every corner of the room, exposing the fake smiles of the 50 people crowded into his mansion for the annual Christmas Eve gala. I hated coming here. The air always smelled like expensive perfume and desperation. But my wife Beatrice insisted. She loved our son, even if the man he had become was a stranger to me. Beatrice was sitting on a velvet armchair in the corner, looking small and tired. Her diabetes had been flaring up lately, and the noise of the party was wearing her down. I watched her from my spot near the bar, my back against the wall. Old habits from my days as a reconnaissance scout in the army never really fade. You find the vantage point, you secure the perimeter, and you watch for threats. I just never expected the threat to be wearing a red silk dress and standing in my son's kitchen. Jessica, my daughter-in-law. She was 32 years old, beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, and she looked at my wife the way a person looks at a stain on a rug. I knew she hated us. I knew she thought we were embarrassed relics that didn't fit into her high-society Chicago life. But I tolerated her because Dante seemed to worship the ground she walked on. I watched Jessica at the drink station. She was preparing the eggnog, a special recipe she claimed was a family tradition. She poured a heavy ladle of the thick, creamy liquid into a crystal glass. Then she looked around. It was a quick, darting glance, a check for witnesses. She didn't see me standing in the shadows of the archway. Her hand moved to the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a small blister pack, popped a single white pill into her palm, and dropped it into the glass. It dissolved instantly in the alcohol and cream. She gave the drink a quick stir with a silver spoon, her face perfectly calm. A small, cold smile playing on her lips. My heart hammered against my ribs, a thudding rhythm I hadn't felt since I was in the jungle 40 years ago. That wasn't sugar. That wasn't nutmeg. That was a weapon. I stepped forward, my cane tapping softly on the hardwood, but the noise of the party swallowed the sound. Jessica picked up the tray. On it were 2 glasses of eggnog. One was clean. The other was spiked. She placed them carefully, the poisoned one on the left, the clean one on the right. She turned to say something to a waiter passing by her, back to the tray for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a lifetime if you know how to use it. I moved. I didn't run. I glided. I reached the table, my hand moving faster than my age should allow. I took the glass on the left and switched it with the glass on the right. I didn't spill a drop. By the time Jessica turned back around, I was already leaning against the counter inspecting a bowl of pine cones as if I had been there for minutes. "Oh, Isaiah," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You startled me. I didn't know you were standing there. I just came for a napkin." I said, my voice gravelly and low. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my face for any sign that I had seen her. I gave her nothing, just the blank stare of a tired old man. She relaxed, dismissing me as she always did. "Well, make sure Beatrice gets something to drink," she said, picking up the tray. "I made this one special for her. The sugar-free version, of course. We have to watch her health." She picked up the glass on the right, the one that was now the poisoned one. She kept the glass on the left for herself. I held my breath. She walked across the room, the red silk of her dress flowing behind her like a trail of blood. I followed at a distance. I watched her approach Beatrice. My wife looked up, her face lighting up with that gentle, trusting smile that I had fallen in love with 50 years ago. "Here you go, Mom," Jessica said, handing Beatrice the clean glass. "Special eggnog just for you." "Thank you, honey," Beatrice said, taking it. "That is so thoughtful of you." I felt a cold rage tighten my chest. Beatrice was thanking her executioner. Jessica stood there holding her own glass, the one loaded with whatever chemical cocktail she had prepared. She tapped a spoon against the side of her glass, the sharp ring cutting through the chatter of the party. The room went quiet. Dante, my son, stepped up beside her, looking handsome but tired, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if he were waiting for a bill collector to burst through the door. "I would like to make a toast," Jessica announced, her voice projecting clearly. "To family, to success, and especially to my wonderful in-laws Beatrice and Isaiah. Thank you for joining us tonight. We worry about you so much, especially with your health declining, Beatrice. But we are just so happy you are still here with us." The guests clapped politely. It was a speech designed to make her look like a saint and my wife look like a burden. "To your health, Mom," Jessica said, looking directly at Beatrice. "To your health," Beatrice echoed, lifting her glass. I stood 10 feet away. I locked eyes with Jessica. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to know. As she lifted the glass to her lips, I offered a small, cold smile. She paused for a fraction of a second, frowning at my expression, but her arrogance overrode her instinct. She tipped the glass back and swallowed. She drank it all. I watched her throat move. I watched the liquid go down. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. Now we wait. The party resumed its noise. I walked over to Beatrice and gently took the glass from her hand. "Let me hold that for you, sweetie," I said. "You don't want to spike your sugar before dinner." "Oh, you are such a worrier, Ike," she chuckled, patting my hand, but she let me take it. I walked to a nearby plant and poured the contents into the soil. I wasn't taking any chances. 10 minutes passed. I stayed close to the wall watching Jessica. She was laughing with a group of investors Dante was trying to impress. She looked radiant, the queen of her little kingdom. Then she stumbled. It was slight at first. She reached out to steady herself on the shoulder of a man in a tuxedo. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if trying to clear water from her ears. "Are you okay, darling?" I heard the man ask. "I am fine," Jessica said, but her words were thick, slurring together. "Just a little dizzy. It is warm in here." She tried to take a step, but her heel caught on the rug. She lurched forward, knocking into a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. Glasses shattered. The crash silenced the room for the second time that night. Jessica stood in the middle of the broken glass, swaying. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were blown wide, the pupils dilated until they swallowed the irises. She looked wild. Jessica Dante rushed over, grabbing her arm. "Honey, what is wrong?" She shoved him away with surprising strength. "Get off me!" she shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable, guttural and raw. "You are suffocating me. All of you." She ripped at the neckline of her dress, popping a button. "Jessica, stop!" Dante hissed, looking at his guests in panic. "You are making a scene." A scene, she laughed, a high-pitched manic sound. "I will show you a scene. Look at these vultures, Dante. Look at them eating your food. They know you are broke. They know we are drowning." The room gasped. Dante's face drained of color. He tried to cover her mouth, but she bit his hand. "Let go," she screamed. "I need to get it out. The walls are melting." "Why is the tree looking at me?" She spun around and pointed at the 12-foot Christmas tree in the corner. She charged at it, convinced it was an enemy. She tackled the tree, sending ornaments and lights crashing down on top of her. She thrashed on the floor, tangled in the wires, screaming about snakes and secrets. The guests were backing away, phones out, recording everything. This was the elite of Chicago society, and they were watching their hostess have a psychotic break on the living room floor. "Call 911. Someone shouted. I stood still. I didn't move to help. I didn't look away. I watched Dante trying to pull his wife out of the wreckage of the Christmas tree. I watched the ruin of their reputation happen in real time. Beatrice was clutching my arm, terrified. "Ike, what is happening? Is she having a stroke?" "I don't know." "Beatrice," I said calmly. "Maybe she drank something she shouldn't have." I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket. I walked over to where Jessica had dropped her glass before she attacked the tree. I picked it up, wrapping the cloth around it to preserve the residue. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. Sirens wailed in the distance. Jessica was now sobbing uncontrollably, curling into a ball, muttering about spiders under her skin. Whatever was in that pill, it was potent. It was meant to make an old woman look senile, to make my wife look like she had lost her mind so they could put her away. But in a younger body mixed with adrenaline and alcohol, it was a chaotic storm. The paramedics rushed in. They had to restrain her. They strapped her to a gurney as she spat and cursed at them. Dante went with them, looking broken. The guests began to file out, whispering, sharing the videos they had just taken. The party was over. As the ambulance lights flashed against the snowy windows, I took Beatrice's hand. "Come on, Bea," I said. "Let's go home." I touched the glass in my pocket. I knew exactly what I had to do next. This wasn't an accident. This was an attempted hit. And I was going to find out exactly what poison she tried to feed my wife, and then I was going to bury her with it. The chaos that unfolded in my son's living room wasn't just a scene, it was a slow-motion train wreck that I couldn't tear my eyes away from. The pill Jessica had dropped into that glass was meant to mimic a stroke or a severe episode of dementia for my wife Beatrice. It was designed to make an old woman look incompetent, to strip her of her dignity so they could sign her away to a home. But inside Jessica's younger system, mixed with the vodka she had been drinking all night and the adrenaline of her own arrogance, the chemical reaction was something entirely different. It didn't just sedate her, it unlocked every dark, twisted thought she had ever suppressed behind that veneer of high society politeness. 10 minutes prior, she had been the queen of the ball. Now she was swaying near the fireplace, her eyes unfocused, staring at the CEO of the investment firm Dante was desperate to partner with. The man, a tall gentleman named Mr. Sterling, was holding a plate of hors d'oeuvres, looking concerned. Jessica pointed a manicured finger at him, her hand trembling violently. "You—" She slurred, her voice loud and cutting through the ambient jazz music. "You look like a walrus in a tuxedo. Do you know that a fat, greasy walrus?" The room went deathly silent. Mr. Sterling stiffened his face, turning a shade of crimson. Dante rushed forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture, a nervous sweat already breaking out on his forehead. "Jessica, honey, you are tired," Dante stammered, trying to grab her arm. "Let's go upstairs. You've had too much eggnog." She shoved him away with a strength that sent him stumbling back into a waiter. "Don't touch me, you loser," she shrieked. Her laugh was sharp, jagged, bordering on hysterical. "Why are you apologizing to him?" "He is broke, Dante. We are all broke, but he is the biggest fraud here." She turned back to Mr. Sterling, her eyes wide and terrifyingly empty. "You think my husband's company is worth investing in? It is a shell. It is empty. We are drowning in debt so deep I can feel the water in my lungs." She clawed at her throat as if she were actually choking, her nails digging into her skin. Dante looked like a man watching his execution. He lunged for her again, trying to cover her mouth, his eyes darting to the guests who were now pulling out their phones. The red recording lights were like tiny eyes in the dim room, capturing every second of their social suicide. "Shut up, Jessica," Dante hissed, his voice cracking with panic. "Stop talking, you are sick." "I am not sick," she screamed, spitting in his face. "I am the only one who sees the bugs. Look at them." She began to slap her own arms, her face twisting in pure horror. "They are all over me. Get them off." She grabbed the neckline of her expensive designer dress, the one she had bragged about costing $3,000, and she ripped it. The fabric tore with a sickening sound. She didn't stop. She was convinced there were things crawling on her skin, things that the drug in her system had conjured up to torment her. She tore at the silk, exposing her undergarments, completely oblivious to the 50 people watching in stunned silence. My wife Beatrice buried her face in my shoulder, unable to watch. I held her tight, but I kept my eyes fixed on Jessica. This was the indignity she had planned for Beatrice. She wanted my wife to strip, to scream, to lose her mind in front of strangers. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Jessica spun around, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She collided with a table full of crystal flutes, sending them crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass seemed to trigger something even darker in her mind. She looked at the shards and began to weep deep guttural sobs that sounded more like an animal in pain than a human being. "It is all gone," she wailed, falling to her knees amidst the broken glass. "The money, the house. We forged the papers, Dante. We forged them, and it still isn't enough." Dante froze. The guests gasped. The word forged hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She was confessing. In her delirium, the filter between her brain and her mouth had completely dissolved. She was spilling the secrets of their financial ruin, the very secrets they needed my money to cover up. Dante grabbed a tablecloth and threw it over her, trying to hide her from the cameras, trying to bundle her up like a broken doll. "Call an ambulance," he screamed, his voice raw. "Someone help me." But no one moved to help him. The elite of Chicago, the people Jessica had tried so hard to impress, were recoiling. They looked at her with disgust, with pity, and with the cold realization that the Jefferson family was not who they claimed to be. I saw Mr. Sterling place his glass on a tray, turn his back, and walk out the front door without a word. He was followed by the other partners. The exodus had begun. Jessica fought against the tablecloth thrashing on the floor. She kicked out her heel, connecting with the base of the 12-foot Christmas tree. The massive pine swayed. Ornaments, heavy glass balls, and heirloom decorations shivered on the branches. With a final agonizing groan of the metal stand, the tree tipped. It came down in slow motion, a cascade of green needles, lights, and gold ribbon crashing down on top of Jessica and Dante. The room plunged into semi-darkness as the lights shorted out, sparking and popping. In the gloom, Jessica's screams turned into a low, rhythmic chanting. She was muttering numbers, account balances, debts. She was reciting the ledger of their failures. I gently guided Beatrice toward the hallway, away from the flying glass and the madness. "Stay here, Bea," I whispered. "I need to get something." I walked back into the ruin of the living room. The ambulance sirens were wailing outside now, getting louder, cutting through the winter night. I saw the glass Jessica had been drinking from. It had rolled under a side table during her rampage, miraculously unbroken. It was the smoking gun. It still held a few dregs of the creamy liquid, enough for a lab to find the traces of the antipsychotics and sedatives she had used. I pulled a clean handkerchief from my breast pocket. I bent down my joints, protesting, and picked up the glass by the rim, careful not to smudge any prints, though hers would be all over it. I wrapped it tightly, ensuring the liquid wouldn't spill, and slid it into the deep inner pocket of my coat. The front doors burst open. Paramedics rushed in their boots, heavy on the marble floor, their radios crackling with static. They pushed through the stunned guests, making their way to the pile of pine branches where Dante was trying to restrain his wife. "What did she take?" a paramedic shouted, shining a flashlight into Jessica's dilated pupils. "Nothing," Dante lied, his face pale and scratched. "She just had a little wine." The paramedic looked at Jessica, who was now trying to bite his hand, foaming slightly at the mouth. "Sir, this is not wine. If you don't tell us what she ingested, we cannot treat her. Is she on medication? Is this an overdose?" Dante looked up, and for a split second, his eyes met mine across the room. He knew. He had to know. He knew his wife had planned to drug his mother, and he knew I must have done something. But he couldn't say it. He couldn't admit it without incriminating himself. He was trapped in his own silence. "I don't know," Dante sobbed, defeated. "I don't know what she did." They strapped Jessica to the gurney. She was still fighting, screaming about the walls melting and the people turning into shadows. As they wheeled her out, the guests parted like the Red Sea, holding their phones high to capture the final walk of shame. I walked over to the window and watched them load her into the back of the ambulance. The flashing red lights illuminated the snow on the lawn, turning it the color of blood. Dante climbed in after her, looking like a man whose soul had been hollowed out. The party was over. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the whispers of the remaining guests, grabbing their coats and fleeing the scene of the disaster. I felt the weight of the glass in my pocket against my ribs. It was cold, hard proof. They thought they could erase us. They thought we were just old, useless obstacles standing between them and a fortune they hadn't earned. But tonight, they learned that the old wolf still has teeth. I went back to Beatrice, who was trembling in the hallway. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, feeling her fragility, her warmth. She was the only thing that mattered. "Is she going to be okay?" Beatrice asked, her voice small. "She will survive," I said, my voice steady and calm, "but her life as she knows it is dead." I led my wife out the front door, stepping over the threshold of my son's mansion for the last time as a guest. From now on, I was the enemy, and I had the weapon I needed to finish what Jessica had started. The smell of a hospital is distinct. It is a cocktail of antiseptic, floor wax, and fear. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting room of North Shore University Hospital, holding my wife's hand. Beatrice was trembling, her skin cold and clammy, her eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. She was terrified, not just because of the scene we had just witnessed, but because she couldn't understand the hatred that had birthed it. Beside us, Dante paced back and forth like a caged animal. He had loosened his tie, and his tuxedo shirt was stained with sweat. He looked like a man whose entire world had just been liquidated. He wasn't looking at us. He was muttering to himself, checking his phone, probably watching his company stock plummet in real time as the videos of his wife attacking a Christmas tree circulated on social media. A nurse in blue scrubs appeared at the double doors. "Mr. Jefferson," she called out. "Your wife is awake. She is asking for you." Dante practically ran through the doors. Beatrice made a move to follow him, her maternal instinct overriding her common sense, but I held her back for a second. "Stay close to me, Bea," I whispered. "We are walking into a den of vipers." We followed Dante into the private room. Jessica was lying in the hospital bed, looking pale and fragile against the white sheets. They had put her in a gown and her hair was matted with sweat and pine needles. The IV drip beeped rhythmically beside her. She looked broken. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity. Almost. Then she opened her eyes and I saw the shark swimming just beneath the surface. She looked at Dante, tears instantly welling up in her eyes. "Oh, Dante," she sobbed, reaching for his hand. It was horrible. I felt like I was dying. The walls were closing in on me. "I know, baby, I know," Dante said, stroking her hair, his voice thick with relief. "You are safe now. The doctors are flushing your system." Jessica's eyes shifted. She looked past Dante's shoulder and landed on Beatrice. Her expression hardened instantly. The tears stopped. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating accusation. "Why is she here?" Jessica hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my wife. "Get her out." Dante looked confused. "Jess, it is just Mom. She came to check on you." "She did this to me," Jessica screamed. Her voice was raspy from the screaming fit earlier, but the venom was potent. "She poisoned me." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth.
"Jessica, honey, what are you saying? I would never hurt you. Don't lie to me," Jessica spat. I saw you hovering over the drinks table. You handed me that glass. You said it was special. You smiled when you gave it to me. I stood there silent, watching the performance. It was masterful. She was cornered, humiliated, and exposed, and yet like a true narcissist, she had found a way to flip the narrative. She knew she had been drugged. She knew the symptoms weren't from alcohol. And since she couldn't admit she had tried to poison Beatrice without incriminating herself, she decided to accuse the victim. It was a gamble, a desperate, vicious gamble. Dante turned slowly to look at his mother. His face was a mask of conflict. He wanted to believe his wife. He needed to believe his wife, because if he didn't, he had to admit he married a monster. And Dante was too weak for that kind of truth. "Mom," Dante said, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you give her a drink?" I handed her the eggnog. Beatrice stammered, tears streaming down her face. "But she gave it to me first. I just gave it back. I don't understand." "You don't understand!" Dante shouted. The sound echoed off the sterile walls. "My wife just had a psychotic break in front of the most important investors in the city. Our reputation is destroyed. And she says you gave her the drink." "Dante." "Please," Beatrice cried, shrinking back. "Don't you dare," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. I stepped in front of Beatrice, putting my body between her and her son. I squared my shoulders. "I am 72 years old, but I am 6'2", and I have stared down men with rifles who were a lot scarier than a marketing executive in a tuxedo." "You will not raise your voice at your mother," I said, looking Dante dead in the eye. "You will not accuse her, and you will take a step back right now." Dante blinked, surprised by the steel in my voice. He was used to the quiet dad, the retired contractor who fixed shelves and went fishing. He forgot who I was before I was his father. "Dad, she drugged my wife," Dante yelled, pointing at Jessica, who was now weeping into her pillow, playing the martyr. "Look at her. Mom has been confusing her medications for months. She probably dropped one of her heart pills or her insulin or whatever she takes into the glass by accident. She is senile, Dad. We have been saying it for weeks. She is dangerous." I felt Beatrice tremble behind me. This was their plan all along. This was the narrative they had been building. The confusion, the forgetfulness. It was all a setup to declare her incompetent. Jessica had just accelerated the timeline because her plan had backfired, and now she was using her own overdose as the final proof. I didn't argue. I didn't try to defend Beatrice's memory. Arguments are for people who don't have facts. I turned my back on my son and looked at the door as the attending physician walked in. He was a young man with tired eyes and a clipboard, looking like he had already had a very long night. "Doctor," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "Yes, sir."
the doctor replied, looking at the tension in the room. We have a disagreement about what happened tonight, I said. My daughter-in-law believes my wife accidentally gave her the wrong medication. My son seems to agree. That is exactly what happened, Dante interjected. My mother is confused. She mixes things up. I ignored him. I kept my eyes on the doctor. I want to know what the toxicology screen says. You drew blood when she arrived, didn't you? The doctor looked at his clipboard, then at Jessica, then at Dante. Yes, we did. We needed to identify the toxin to administer the correct treatment. And I asked, what did you find? Jessica stopped crying. She lay very still. She knew what was in that pill, but she didn't know if the doctors could identify it. She was banking on it being generic enough to pass as a mistake. The doctor cleared his throat. It wasn't heart medication, Mr. Jefferson, and it wasn't insulin. Dante frowned. Then what was it? We found high concentrations of a synthetic compound often used in severe cases of schizophrenia, the doctor said. It is a powerful antipsychotic that has been banned in several countries due to its side effects. In a patient who does not suffer from psychosis, especially when mixed with alcohol, it causes extreme hallucinations, paranoia, and temporary loss of motor control. It mimics a severe stroke or a psychotic break. The room went silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner seemed deafening. Dante looked at the doctor, then at Jessica. Where would my mother get an antipsychotic drug? She takes medication for diabetes and blood pressure. That is a good question, the doctor said. This isn't something you get at a local pharmacy by accident. This is something you have to look for. I watched Jessica. I saw the gears turning in her head. She was trapped, but she was fast. I stood in the corner of the room, my hand resting in my pocket, feeling the cold glass of the phone I had used earlier that night. I didn't pull it out. Not yet. I let the silence stretch. I let the weight of the doctor's words sink into Dante's thick skull. But I also remembered what I had seen earlier. 3 hours ago, during the party, before the eggnog, before the chaos, I had gone to the guest bathroom on the first floor. It was a lavish powder room with gold faucets and silk towels. I had gone in to wash my hands, but my eyes, trained from years of scanning environments for intel, had caught something in the trash can. It was a small silver blister pack, empty. It had been discarded, carelessly buried under a few used paper towels. Most people wouldn't have looked twice. But I wasn't most people. I had reached in using a tissue to protect my fingers and pulled it out. I had taken a picture of it. I had zoomed in on the brand name stamped on the foil. It was the same name the doctor had just read from his chart. I looked at Dante. He was struggling. The cognitive dissonance was tearing him apart. His mother, the woman who baked cookies and knitted blankets, didn't have access to black market antipsychotics. His wife, the woman who spent her days online shopping and managing her failing PR firm, did. Mom must have found it. Dante said, his voice weak. Maybe she found an old prescription of yours, Dad. From after the war. I looked at him with pity. I have never taken antipsychotics, Dante. And you know that. Jessica sat up, her eyes blazing. She saw the doubt in Dante's face and she attacked. You are all idiots, she screamed. Beatrice is obsessed with health supplements. She orders weird stuff from the internet all the time. She probably bought it thinking it was a vitamin or a memory booster and dropped it in my drink because she is blind as a bat. It was a weak lie. It was desperate. But for a man like Dante, who was terrified of the alternative, it was a lifeline. He grabbed onto it. Right, Dante said, nodding rapidly. That makes sense. Mom buys all those herbal things. She probably ordered the wrong thing from some foreign website. God, Mom, you almost killed her. He turned to Beatrice, his face red with misplaced anger. You are irresponsible. You are dangerous. I can't believe you. Beatrice was sobbing into her hands, unable to defend herself against the insanity of the accusation. The doctor looked uncomfortable. He knew it was a stretch. He knew it didn't add up. But he was a doctor, not a detective. His job was to treat the patient, not solve the crime. Mr. Jefferson, the doctor said to Dante, regardless of how she ingested it, your wife needs to stay for observation. The effects should wear off in 24 hours, but we need to monitor her heart rate. Fine, Dante said. Just keep my mother away from her. He pointed at us. Get out, both of you. I don't want to see you. I looked at Dante. I looked at the man I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had bailed out of debt more times than I could count, and I saw nothing of myself in him. He was gone. He was fully hers now. Come on, Beatrice, I said softly. We turned to leave. As I reached the door, I looked back at Jessica. She was watching me. Her tears had stopped. She gave me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought she had won. She thought she had twisted the knife and turned the victim into the villain. But she didn't know about the handkerchief in my pocket. She didn't know about the glass I had saved. She didn't know about the photo on my phone. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't threaten her. I just opened the door and led my weeping wife out into the hallway. Dante followed us out, closing the door behind him. He stood in the corridor looking at us with disgust. "This is it," he said. "I am done. I can't trust you with my family anymore." Dante, Beatrice pleaded. "Please." "No, Mom." He cut her off. "You need help, serious help. And until you get it, until you are in a facility that can manage you, you are not welcome in my house. You are not to contact us." He looked at me. "And you, Dad, you are enabling her. You are letting her rot. If you don't put her in a home, I will petition the state to intervene. I won't let her kill someone next time." He turned on his heel and walked back into the room, slamming the door shut. I stood there in the fluorescent light of the hospital corridor. My wife was breaking down, her heart shattered by her son's cruelty. I held her, stroking her back, letting her cry. But inside, I was cold, ice cold. Dante had just declared war. He had threatened to take my wife, to lock her away, to steal the last years of our life together. He had chosen his side. I looked at the closed door. I thought about the evidence I had. It wasn't enough yet. A picture of a wrapper and a glass with residue proves she was drugged, but it doesn't prove intent. It doesn't prove she meant it for Beatrice. It was a he said, she said situation, and Dante was the judge. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to see the money trail. I needed to know why they were so desperate to get Beatrice out of the way right now. I took my phone out of my pocket. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Mike. Mike was a guy I served with. He did 2 tours in special ops, then came home and opened a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate fraud and infidelity. He could find a needle in a haystack, and he could find a bank account in the Cayman Islands. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Mike's voice was rough, familiar. "It is 3 in the morning. Is everything okay?" "No, Mike," I said. "I need a favor, a big one. Name it. I need you to dig into my son's wife, Jessica Jefferson. I need to know everything, her debts, her company, her bank accounts. I need to know who she owes money to, and I need it fast." "Consider it done," Mike said. "Give me 24 hours. I hung up. I looked at Beatrice. She was wiping her eyes, trying to compose herself. "Let's go home, Bea," I said. We walked to the elevator. I didn't look back. The time for being a father was over. The time for being a husband, a protector, and a soldier had just begun. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to use poison and lies. Fine. I was going to use the truth, and I was going to bring their whole world crashing down around their ears. The morning after the hospital incident, the phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. It wasn't a request for a conversation. It was a notification of hostilities. I put it on speaker so Beatrice could hear, though I instantly regretted it when I heard the icy, detached tone of our son's voice. Dante didn't ask how we were. He didn't ask if his mother had slept. He simply delivered an ultimatum that sounded like it had been drafted by a lawyer. Effective immediately, he said, his voice void of any warmth, "You are not to come to my house. You are not to contact Jessica. If you attempt to see us, I will file for a restraining order. And Mom, if there is one more incident, one more sign that you are a danger to yourself or others, I will have the papers signed to place you in a facility by the end of the week. I am doing this for your own good." The line went dead before I could say a word. Beatrice sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling around her coffee mug. She didn't cry. She just looked at the phone as if it were a bomb that had just detonated in the center of our lives. The son she had nursed, the boy she had walked to school, the man she had bragged about to every cashier at the grocery store had just threatened to lock her away like a rabid dog. I didn't try to comfort her with empty words. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray Chicago sky. My hands were steady, but inside a switch had been flipped. For 40 years I had been Isaiah Jefferson, the retired contractor, the quiet neighbor, the doting husband. But that man couldn't save us now. That man was too soft for the war Dante had just declared. I had to reach back into the past, into the parts of myself I had buried when I came home from the service, and find the man who knew how to survive in hostile territory. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a tactical operation. I kissed Beatrice on the forehead. "I will be back in a few hours," I told her. "Lock the door. Don't answer the phone." I drove to a small diner on the south side of the city, a place that smelled of bacon grease and old cigarettes, the kind of place where men like Mike did business because nobody asked questions. Mike was sitting in a back booth nursing a black coffee. He looked exactly the same as he did when we were in the unit, just with more gray in his beard and a few more scars. He didn't smile when he saw me. He just tapped the thick manila envelope sitting on the table. "You are not going to like this, Ike," he said, his voice rough like gravel. I sat down. "I didn't come here for good news, Mike. I came for ammunition." He slid the envelope across the Formica table. I opened it. It was a comprehensive financial dossier on Jessica Jefferson and her failing public relations firm JJPR. I scanned the pages, my eyes catching the red numbers that dominated the spreadsheets. "She is not just broke," Mike said, leaning in. "She is underwater. Her company has been bleeding money for 2 years. She lost 3 major clients last quarter because she promised results she couldn't deliver. But that is not the worst part." I looked up. "What is the worst part?" "She took out a loan," Mike said. "Not from a bank. Banks stopped lending to her 6 months ago. She went to private lenders, the kind that break kneecaps if you miss a payment." I looked at the figure highlighted in yellow. $2 million. "She owes $2 million, I whispered. "And the note comes due in 30 days, Mike said. "If she doesn't pay, they liquidate everything. Her business, her assets, her reputation, and considering who she borrowed from, maybe her life." It all fell into place. The desperation, the panic at the party, the rush to get Beatrice declared incompetent. Jessica wasn't just a cruel woman who hated her in-laws. She was a cornered rat fighting for her survival. She needed money, and she needed it fast. $2 million was a lot of money, but it was exactly the kind of money you could get if you liquidated an estate, if you sold a family home, if you cashed in a life insurance policy. But Dante knows this. I asked, though I already feared the answer. Mike looked at me with pity. "Ike, look at the last page." I flipped to the back of the dossier. It was a copy of a property deed, my property deed. The deed to the 3-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park where Beatrice and I had lived for the last 10 years. When we bought the place, I had put it in Dante's name. It was meant to be a way to avoid inheritance taxes, later a gift to ensure his future. We paid for it. We paid every dime of the mortgage, every month of the HOA fees. But legally on paper, it belonged to Dante Jefferson. I stared at the document Mike had found. It was a recent filing dated 3 weeks ago, a second mortgage. Dante had taken out a loan against our home. He cashed out the equity, Mike explained quietly. $700,000. He handed it straight to Jessica's creditors to buy them a few more months. My vision blurred. I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharper than any wound I had ever taken in the field. This was the home where Beatrice felt safe. This was the home I had bought to ensure she would never have to worry about a roof over her head. And my son, my own flesh and blood, had leveraged it to pay for his wife's mistakes. If they default on that loan, Mike said, his voice gentle but firm, the bank takes the condo. You and Beatrice are evicted. I closed the folder. The rage that filled me was cold and quiet. It was the kind of rage that allows you to think clearly, to plan to execute. Dante hadn't just betrayed us. He had sold us. He had looked at his parents, the people who sacrificed everything for him, and saw nothing but collateral to be liquidated. "He is going to lose the house," I said, my voice steady. "Jessica owes $2 million. The $700,000 he stole from us is just a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It won't save her. It will just delay the inevitable. And when the money runs out next month, they will come for the rest." "Exactly," Mike said. "That is why they need control of Beatrice. They need access to your retirement accounts, your savings, everything. They need to strip you bare to cover the hole they dug." I stood up, tucking the envelope under my arm. It felt heavy like a weapon. "Thanks, Mike," I said. "Send me the bill." "No bill," Mike said. "Just get them, Ike. Get them before they get you." I walked out of the diner into the biting wind. The city looked different now. It wasn't a place I lived. It was a battlefield. I sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the gray dashboard. I thought about Dante. I thought about the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee, the teenager who I taught to drive in this very truck. I mourned him. I grieved for him right then and there because the man who bore his name now was dead to me. He had mortgaged my wife's security. He had stolen her peace. And he was planning to lock her away to cover his tracks. I started the engine. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a singular driving purpose. They wanted a war. They wanted to play games with legal documents and secret pills. Fine. I drove home, my mind already working through the next steps. I needed to secure our assets. I needed to protect Beatrice. But more than that, I needed to set a trap. If they were desperate enough to mortgage my home, they were desperate enough to make a mistake. And when they did, I would be there. I walked into our apartment. Beatrice was still sitting at the table, staring at the wall. She looked up when I entered, her eyes filled with fear. "Did you fix it, Ike?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Did you talk to him?" I sat down across from her. I took her hands in mine. They were soft, wrinkled, the hands of a woman who had spent her life giving. "No, B," I said gently. "I didn't talk to him." "Then what are we going to do?" she whispered. "He is going to put me away." I looked at the woman I had loved for 50 years. I saw the fear in her eyes, the confusion, and I made a silent vow that the only person going away would be the one who tried to hurt her. "We are going to fight, Beatrice," I said. I didn't tell her about the mortgage. I didn't tell her that her son had already sold the roof over her head. It would break her, and I needed her strong. I needed her to trust me. I pulled the envelope out and placed it on the table. "I know everything I said. I know why they did it, and I know how to stop them. But I need you to be brave. I need you to do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" She looked at the envelope, then at me. She straightened her back. She wiped her eyes. "Yes," she said, "I can." "Good," I said. "Because we are about to invite the wolves to dinner." I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for my personal attorney, a man named Mr. Henderson, who was known in legal circles as a shark in a three-piece suit. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Jefferson," he said. "To what do I owe the pleasure I need to make some changes to my estate planning?" I said, my eyes fixed on the manila envelope. "And I need to report a theft, a big one." I looked at Beatrice. "And get ready," I told the lawyer. "My son is going to try to file for guardianship of my wife. I want to be ready to counter-sue so hard his ancestors feel it." The game had changed. They were playing for money. I was playing for survival. And I had just discovered that the man I called my son was the most dangerous enemy I had ever faced. But he made one critical error. He forgot who taught him how to fight. And he forgot that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man on earth. 2 days after the hospital, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. It was sleek, expensive, and looked like a hearse coming to collect the living. I watched through the blinds as my son Dante stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket, looking like a man walking to the gallows. Then came the lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, with a briefcase that cost more than my truck. And finally, Jessica. She wore oversized sunglasses to hide whatever lingering effects the drug might have had, but her posture was rigid, predatory. She didn't look like a woman recovering from a medical emergency. She looked like a general arriving to accept a surrender. I turned to Beatrice. She was sitting in her rocking chair, clutching a Bible, her knuckles white. "Remember the plan B," I whispered, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You are confused. You are scared. And I am just a useless old man who can't stop his hands from shaking. Do not break character." I shuffled to the door. I hunched my shoulders, dropping 3 inches of height. I let my hand tremor as I reached for the knob. When I opened the door, I didn't look them in the eye. I looked at their shoes. "Dante." I mumbled, my voice thin and reedy. "We weren't expecting you. We are not here for a social call," Dad, Dante said, stepping past me without an invitation. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. Jessica breathed in the scent of her perfume, filling the small entryway, overpowering the smell of Beatrice's baking. She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were clear, cold, and fixed on my wife. "Hello, Beatrice," she said. Beatrice shrank back into her chair. "I didn't mean to," she whimpered, playing her part perfectly. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "Save it," Jessica snapped. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He walked into the living room and placed his briefcase on the coffee table. He didn't sit, he loomed. "Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson," he began, his voice smooth and oily. "Given the unfortunate events of Christmas Eve and Mrs. Jefferson's obvious cognitive decline, which resulted in the poisoning of her daughter-in-law, we have no choice but to take immediate legal action." "Legal action?" I asked, letting my lower lip tremble. You are going to arrest her. No, Dante said, quickly stepping forward. No, Dad. We are trying to protect her. And you. The lawyer opened the briefcase and slid a thick stack of documents across the table. This is a voluntary guardianship agreement, Sterling said. It grants Dante and Jessica full power of attorney over Beatrice's medical and financial decisions. It also places her assets into a trust managed by them to ensure they are used for her care. I looked at the papers. I couldn't read the fine print without my glasses, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what they were. They were the keys to the kingdom. If Beatrice signed this, they could sell the house, liquidate the accounts, and put her in the cheapest state-run facility they could find within 48 hours. They would strip us clean to pay off Jessica's $2 million debt. We just want to help Mom, Dante said, his voice straining with fake sincerity. You almost killed Jessica. You aren't safe here. You need professional supervision. I tried to help you. Beatrice cried softly. I just wanted you to be healthy. She is confessing. Jessica whispered to the lawyer, a smirk playing on her lips. Did you hear that? She admits she did it. I shuffled over to the table. I picked up the documents, my hands shaking violently. I dropped them, then fumbled to pick them up, acting the part of the frail, overwhelmed husband. I don't know, I stammered. This seems like a lot. Maybe we should read it first. There is no time, Jessica cut in sharply. The state is already investigating the poisoning. If you don't sign this voluntary agreement today, they will come and take her away in handcuffs. Do you want your wife in prison, Isaiah? Because that is the alternative. It was a lie. A bold, terrified lie. The state wasn't investigating anything yet because the toxicology report hadn't been released to the police. But they were banking on our fear. They were banking on us being two scared old people who didn't understand the law. I looked at Beatrice. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic that was only half feigned. I don't want to go to prison, Ike, she whispered. I sighed, a long, defeated sound. I looked at Dante. You promise you will take care of her, I asked. You promise you won't put her away? Of course, Dad. Dante lied. We just want her safe. Fine, I said. Fine. We will sign. I turned my back to them to get a pen from the drawer. This was the moment. I had practiced this move 50 times in the last 24 hours. On the counter, hidden under a stack of mail, was a folder identical to the one the lawyer had brought. Inside was a stack of papers that looked exactly like the guardianship agreement. Same font, same headers, but the text was gibberish, a copy of an old appliance manual I had formatted to look legal. I grabbed the pen, I grabbed the folder. I turned back around, holding the pen in my right hand and my own folder in my left pressed against my hip. I approached the coffee table. I stumbled. It was a calculated trip, my foot catching on the rug. I lurched forward, dropping the pen and slapping my hand down on the table to catch myself. Whoops, I cried out. My bad leg. I am sorry. In the chaos of the fall, I swept the lawyer's document off the table and onto the floor. I fell to my knees to pick it up. Dante moved to help me, but I waved him off. I got it. I got it. I wheezed. I am just clumsy. Old age is a curse. I gathered the papers. But as I brought them up from the floor, I didn't bring up the lawyer's documents. I slid those under the sofa with a flick of my wrist. I brought up my folder, the decoy I had been holding against my hip. I placed the decoy on the table. It was a seamless switch, a sleight of hand I had learned playing cards in the barracks 50 years ago. Here, I said, panting, pushing the papers toward Beatrice. Sign it, Bea. Let's just get this over with. Beatrice looked at the paper. She didn't read it. She knew the plan. She took the pen from my shaking hand. Okay, she whispered. She signed her name on the bottom line. It was a signature on a warranty for a refrigerator that died 10 years ago, formatted to look like a legal decree. I signed as the witness. My hand didn't shake this time. There, I said, closing the folder and handing it to the lawyer. It is done. Mr. Sterling took the folder without opening it. He was too arrogant to check. He thought he was dealing with sheep. He slid it into his briefcase and snapped the locks shut. You made the right decision, he said, standing up. Jessica let out a breath she had been holding. Her shoulders relaxed. She looked at Dante, and for the first time her mask slipped completely. She didn't look relieved. She looked victorious. She looked like a hunter standing over a kill. Finally, she muttered loud enough for me to hear. Finally done with these two useless old weights. She looked around our small, cozy living room with undisguised contempt. "We will send a crew to pack her things next week," Jessica said to me. "You should start looking for a smaller place for yourself, Isaiah. Once we assess the assets, we will likely be selling this condo to cover her care costs." "But Dante said this was my home," I stammered. "It is Dante's home," Jessica corrected coldly. "His name is on the deed. And we need the equity. Don't worry, we will find you a nice studio apartment, somewhere affordable." Dante looked at his shoes. He couldn't even look me in the face as his wife evicted me. "Let's go," Jessica said, grabbing Dante's arm. "The smell in here is giving me a headache." They turned to leave. The lawyer led the way. "Wait," I said. "Let me walk you out." I grabbed my cane. As I stood up, I bumped the coffee table again. I reached under the rim to steady it. In that split second, I peeled the backing off a small black adhesive disc I had palmed from my pocket. It was a high-powered listening device Mike had given me. I stuck it firmly to the underside of Mr. Sterling's briefcase as he turned to hold the door for Jessica. It was invisible, it was active, and it had a range of 2 miles. "Good luck, Mr. Jefferson," the lawyer said dismissively. I watched them walk down the driveway. Jessica was already on her phone, probably calling her creditors to tell them the money was coming. Dante was trailing behind like a beaten dog. I closed the door and locked it. I stood there for a moment listening to the silence of the house. Then I straightened my spine. The tremors stopped. The hunch in my shoulders disappeared. I walked over to the sofa, reached underneath, and pulled out the real legal documents they had brought. I walked to the kitchen, struck a match, and set the corner of the papers on fire over the sink. I watched them burn, turning to ash and smoke. They thought they had just signed away my wife's freedom. They thought they had won. I went into the study and turned on the receiver Mike had set up. I put on the headphones. The signal crackled to life. I could hear the car doors slamming. I could hear the engine of the sedan start up. And then I heard Jessica's voice, crystal clear. "God, that was easier than I thought," she laughed. "I told you they were senile. They didn't even read it." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just planted a bomb in the enemy's camp and was waiting to press the detonator. "Keep talking, Jessica," I whispered to the empty room. "Tell me everything." I sat down, grabbed a notepad, and began to write. The war was far from over, but I had just won the first battle, and they didn't even know they had lost. The receiver on my desk was a small black box, no bigger than a pack of playing cards, but it was currently the heaviest thing in the room. I sat in my leather armchair, the one Beatrice had bought me for my 60th birthday, and adjusted the volume on the headphones. The signal from the bug I had planted on the lawyer's briefcase was strong. I could hear the hum of the sedan's engine. I could hear the turn signal clicking. And I could hear the woman who had married my son plotting the end of my life. "I kept telling you it would be easy," Jessica said, her voice distorted slightly by the static but unmistakable in its arrogance. "Did you see his hands shaking? The old man is terrified. He would have signed a death warrant if we put it in front of him." I stared at the wall. My hands were perfectly steady now. The tremor I had faked for their benefit was gone, replaced by the cold stillness of a soldier in a hide site. "I still don't feel good about this, Jess," Dante said. His voice was quiet or muffled. "That is the condo I grew up in. That is their home. It is an asset," Dante Jessica snapped. "And right now it is an asset that is depreciating while we are drowning. We have the power of attorney now, or we will as soon as Sterling files those papers. Once the judge stamps it, we list the unit. The market in Lincoln Park is hot. We can get $750,000 cash. Fast." "But where will they go?" Dante asked. "There is that state facility in Gary," Jessica said. "Sunnyvale or whatever. I checked the rates. It is covered by their basic Social Security. We dump them there and we use the condo money to pay off the sharks." I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. Sunnyvale. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. A place where the elderly were sedated and left in soiled sheets until they developed sepsis and died. That was the retirement my daughter-in-law had planned for the woman who knitted her a scarf every winter. But that wasn't the worst of it. The conversation shifted, and the temperature in my study seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What about the other thing?" Dante asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The insurance." I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears. I stopped breathing. "I found the policy in his desk drawer last week when I was looking for the bank statements," Jessica said. "Beatrice has a life insurance policy from her days at the school board. It is old, but it is solid. $500,000, so Dante said. So it has a double indemnity rider, Jessica said. If she dies of natural causes, it is 500. But if she dies of an accidental death, a fall, a fire, a car crash, it pays out 1 million. There was a silence in the car, a heavy, pregnant silence. You are not suggesting what I think you are, Dante stammered. I am just saying she is old, Jessica said, her voice dangerously calm. She is confused. We already established that with the incident at the party. Everyone saw her. Everyone knows she is mixing up medications. Everyone knows she is unstable. If she were to have an accident, Jessica continued, if she were to, say, fall down those steep stairs in the condo or leave the gas on while cooking, it would be a tragedy, a profitable tragedy, but just a tragedy. No one would question it, not after what happened at the Christmas party. I took the headphones off and laid them gently on the desk. My heart was beating a slow, rhythmic thud against my ribs. It wasn't just humiliation. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The pill and the eggnog, the scene at the party, the accusations of dementia. It wasn't just about embarrassing Beatrice or getting power of attorney. It was about building a narrative. They were creating a paper trail. If Beatrice fell down the stairs tomorrow, the police would look at the reports. They would see the testimony that she was confused. They would see the hospital records from the party where she supposedly drugged herself. They would see a pattern of decline. They would rule it an accidental death caused by senility. Jessica wasn't just a thief. She was an architect of murder, and my son was sitting in the driver's seat listening to her plan his mother's death, and he wasn't stopping the car. He wasn't screaming. He was just driving. I stood up and walked to the window. Beatrice was in the garden pruning her roses. She looked so peaceful. She was humming a little tune, unaware that miles away in a luxury sedan, her life was being weighed against a debt ledger. I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a man who had built houses, who had held babies, who had planted trees. But they were also the hands of a man who had been a recon scout in Vietnam. I knew how to track, I knew how to wait, and I knew how to strike. I had been playing defense. I had been trying to protect our assets, trying to shield Beatrice from the truth. But defense doesn't win wars. Defense just delays the inevitable. If they wanted to turn my wife into a statistic for a payout, they had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed I was just a senile old man standing in their way. They didn't know I was the one who was going to bury them. I went back to my desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a burner phone I kept for emergencies. I didn't want this call on my personal bill. I dialed a number I had memorized decades ago. It rang once. Law offices of Arthur Henderson. A smooth voice answered. Art it is, Ike Jefferson. There was a pause. Then a warmth entered the voice. Ike, it has been a long time. How is Beatrice? She is in danger. Art, I said, my voice flat and hard. I need you to clear your schedule. Ike, you know I bill $600 an hour now, Art said, though I could hear the curiosity in his tone. I don't care if you bill $6,000, I said. I have a job for you. And I am not talking about drafting a will. I am talking about going to war. Talk to me, Art said, his voice shifting from friendly to professional. I need to liquidate an asset, I said. I have a commercial property, the one I bought in the 80s, the warehouse district. The one you never told Dante about, Art asked. That is the one, I said. It is sitting on 5 acres of prime real estate. I had it appraised last year. 5 million, Art said, give or take. I want to use it, I said, but not for me. I want to use it as bait. Bait for who? For a rat, I said. A rat that owes $2 million and thinks she can kill my wife to get it. There was a long silence on the line. Then I heard the sound of a chair shifting. Start from the beginning, Art said, and don't leave anything out. I told him everything. I told him about the eggnog, the hospital, the recording I had just heard, the mortgage fraud, the insurance plot. When I finished, Art was silent for a full 10 seconds. Ike, he said, finally, his voice low, if we do this, we are going to destroy them, not just financially. If we play this right, they go to prison for a long time. That is your son. I looked out the window again. Beatrice had stopped pruning. She was looking up at the sky, watching a cardinal land on the fence. I don't have a son, I said. My son died the day he let that woman talk about killing his mother and didn't drive that car straight into a police station. What I have is a target. Understood, Art said. What do you need me to do? I need you to draft some papers, I said. Fake papers. I need a deed of transfer, and I need you to set up a meeting. I want to buy a company. You want to buy Jessica's company? Art asked, confused. Why? Because I want to see the look on her face when she thinks she has won, I said. I want to lift her up so high that when I drop her, she shatters into a million pieces. I will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning, Art said. Ike, be careful. If she is desperate enough to talk about murder, she is desperate enough to do it. I know, I said. That is why I am not going to give her the chance. I hung up the phone. I took the cassette out of the recorder and labeled it with the date and time. I placed it in the safe along with the glass from the party and the financial dossier Mike had given me. The evidence was piling up, but evidence wasn't enough. Justice is a slow machine, and I didn't have time for slow. I needed to accelerate the timeline. I needed to force them into a mistake so big that no lawyer on earth could save them. I walked into the kitchen. Beatrice came in from the garden, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Who were you talking to, Ike?" she asked, washing her hands at the sink. "Just an old friend," I said. She dried her hands and looked at me. Her eyes were worried. "Are we going to be okay, Ike? Are they really going to take the house?" I walked over to her and wrapped my arms around her. I kissed the top of her head, smelling the lavender shampoo she had used for 40 years. "Nobody is taking anything from us, Bea, I promised." I looked over her shoulder at the calendar on the wall. Next week was the new year, a time for new beginnings, and a time for endings. "I am going to fix this," I whispered. I released her and walked to the fridge. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady, my mind was clear. They wanted a confused old man. I would give them one. They wanted a victim. I would give them one. But when the trap snapped shut, they would realize that the only thing confused about me was why I hadn't done this sooner. I took a sip of water. It was cool and refreshing. Game on, Jessica, I thought. Let's see who really runs this family. 3 days after the meeting with the lawyer, the lock on my front door clicked open. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. Beatrice and I were sitting at the kitchen table eating meatloaf and green beans, the steam rising from the plates in the quiet comfort of our home. We hadn't invited anyone. We hadn't expected anyone. But the door swung open with the entitlement of an owner, and my son walked in, followed by Jessica and a short, balding man in a cheap suit who smelled like stale tobacco. Dante didn't even say hello. He looked at us sitting there with our forks mid-air and flinched, a spasm of guilt crossing his face before he smoothed it over with a mask of indifference. "Sorry to interrupt dinner," he muttered, not looking sorry at all. "We just need to show the unit." "Show the unit?" Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. Jessica stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood I had installed myself 15 years ago. "Yes, Beatrice. The unit. We have a cash buyer interested in a quick close. Mr. Kowalski here is very motivated." She gestured to the balding man who was already scanning the living room, calculating square footage and demolition costs. He looked at us like we were old furniture that came with the house, inconvenient but easily disposed of. I stood up. I saw Beatrice's hands shaking. She was about to cry. She was about to ask why they were selling her home while she was still eating dinner in it. I put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. It was a signal. "Stick to the script." "Oh, of course," I said, my voice cracking into the perfect imitation of a confused, defeated old man. "I forgot you were coming. My memory isn't what it used to be." I shuffled around the table, wiping my mouth with a napkin. "Please come in. It is a lovely apartment. Very sturdy. Good bones." Dante looked at me surprised. He had expected a fight. He had braced himself for an argument for me to scream about my rights. My compliance threw him off balance. He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. Jessica, however, smiled. It was a shark's smile. She thought I was broken. She thought the threat of the nursing home had finally cowed me into submission. "Go ahead, Mr. Kowalski," Jessica said, waving her hand imperiously. "Look around. The layout is open concept potential. You just have to look past the clutter." She cast a disdainful look at our family photos on the mantel, the knitted throw blankets, the life we had built. I walked over to the stranger. "Mr. Kowalski," I said, playing the eager tour guide, "you should see the master bedroom. It gets wonderful light in the morning, and the HVAC system was replaced just last year. Top of the line." I led the man down the hallway. Dante and Jessica followed, whispering to each other. "He is losing it," Dante whispered. "He is actually helping us sell his own house." "It is better this way," Jessica hissed back. "It saves us the trouble of eviction. If he goes quietly to Sunnyvale, we get the money faster." I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached, but I kept my face blank. I showed Mr. Kowalski the bathroom. I showed him the closets. I pointed out the crown molding. I was the perfect salesman for my own demise. While Mr. Kowalski inspected the water pressure in the shower, we moved back into the living room. Beatrice had cleared the table, her eyes red, but she stayed silent. "This place will need a gut renovation," Kowalski shouted from the bathroom. "But for 700,000, I can make the numbers work. 700,000. That was the price of my life. That was the price Dante had put on his parents so he could pay off a fraction of his wife's debt." I walked over to the small writing desk in the corner of the room. This was my command center. It was usually neat, organized with military precision. But tonight it was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere. Bills, flyers, junk mail. It looked like the desk of a man who was losing control of his affairs. But it was a carefully constructed chaos. Jessica walked over her eyes, scanning the room, mentally spending the money she didn't have yet. She stopped at the desk. She couldn't help herself. She was a snoop by nature, always looking for an angle, always looking for a secret. She picked up a utility bill, sneering at the amount. Then she saw it. I had placed it perfectly. It was sticking out from under a stack of old magazines, just enough of the letterhead visible to catch the eye. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope from the First National Bank of Chicago Private Wealth Division. The letter inside was pulled halfway out. I watched her from the corner of my eye as I pretended to adjust a picture frame. I saw her gaze lock onto the paper. I saw her hand reach out, hesitant at first, then snatching it up while Dante was busy talking to the buyer. She read it. I knew exactly what it said because I had drafted it with my lawyer Arthur just that morning. It was an appraisal update for a commercial property. A 5-acre lot in the industrial district near the airport. A lot I had bought in the 80s for pennies when the steel mills closed, holding on to it as the city expanded around it. The letter was brief. "Dear Mr. Jefferson, per your request, we have updated the valuation of your commercial holding at 404 Industrial Way. Given the recent zoning changes and the airport expansion project, the current market value of the land is estimated at $5,200,000. Please contact us to discuss liquidation options or tax sheltering strategies." $5 million. I saw the blood drain from Jessica's face. Then it rushed back in, turning her cheeks a flushed, feverish red. Her hand trembled. She read the number again. She looked at the date. It was current. She looked at me. I was standing by the window, looking old and frail, staring out at the street. I looked like a man who had forgotten he owned a fortune. I looked like a man who had forgotten he was a millionaire. She shoved the letter into her purse. Her movements were jerky, adrenaline flooding her system. She looked at Mr. Kowalski, who was walking back into the room, wiping his hands on his pants. "I will take it," Kowalski said. "Cash offer. We can close in 10 days. Dante's face lit up. "That is great. That is—" "No," Jessica said. Dante froze. We need to think about it," Jessica stammered. Her voice was high-tight. "Think about it," Dante whispered, grabbing her arm. "Jess, are you crazy? We need this. The loan sharks." "We can't sell," she hissed, pulling him away from the buyer. "Not yet." Mr. Kowalski looked annoyed. "Look, lady, do you want to sell or not? I have other properties to see." "I am sorry," Jessica said, putting on her best fake smile, though it looked like a rictus of pain. "We have a family emergency. We need to discuss this privately. Please leave." She practically pushed the man out the door. Dante looked at her like she had grown a second head. "Jess, what are you doing?" he shouted once the door closed. "We are dead. We are literally dead if we don't get that money." "Shut up, Dante," she snapped. She turned to me. Her entire demeanor changed. The contempt vanished, replaced by a terrifying, predatory warmth. She walked over to me and took my arm, guiding me to the armchair. "Dad," she said, using the word for the first time in years, "why don't you sit down? You look tired." I sat down, looking confused. "Did the man leave?" I asked. "I thought he wanted the house." "He did," Jessica said, stroking my hand. "But Dante and I were thinking, maybe we are rushing things. This is your home. You and Mom love it here." Dante's jaw dropped. "Jessica, have you lost your mind?" She shot him a look that could have cut glass. A look that said, "Shut up and follow my lead. We don't want to uproot you." Jessica continued, her voice dripping with syrup. "We want to do what is best for you. Maybe there are other assets we can look at. Other ways to handle the finances without selling the condo." She was fishing. She wanted to know if I remembered the land. She wanted to know if I was lucid enough to sign it over, or if she could just take it using the power of attorney she thought she had. I looked at her blankly. "I don't know," I mumbled. "I have some old papers somewhere. I forget things. I bought some dirt a long time ago, I think. Probably worthless now. Just weeds." Jessica's eyes lit up like fireworks. Dirt. Weeds. She thought I was talking about a vacant lot worth a few thousand. She had the appraisal in her purse that said $5 million. She thought she had found a winning lottery ticket in the pocket of an old coat I was about to throw away. If they sold the condo now and put us in a state home, the state would seize our assets to pay for our care. They would do an audit. They would find the land, and the money would go to the government, not to Jessica. But if she kept us here, if she kept us happy and confused, she could get me to sign over the deed to the land. She could transfer the title before anyone noticed. $5 million would pay her debts, buy her a new mansion, and leave her with enough to live like a queen. Selling the condo was small potatoes. She was hunting a whale now. "You know what, Dad," Jessica said, smiling. "Why don't we all have a nice dinner this weekend? We can talk about everything. We can look through those old papers together. I would love to help you organize your dirt." I looked at Beatrice. She was watching me, terrified but silent. "That would be nice," I said. Dante looked between us, totally lost. "Jess, the deadline is next week. We don't have time for dinner." "Trust me," Jessica whispered to him, patting his cheek. "I just saved our lives." She grabbed her purse, clutching it tight against her side where the letter was hidden. "We are leaving now," she announced. "We will call you tomorrow, Dad. Don't worry about the house. You are staying right here." She dragged a confused Dante out the door. I watched them go. I waited until the taillights of the black sedan disappeared around the corner. Then I stood up and walked to the door, locking it and sliding the deadbolt home. I walked back to the kitchen. Beatrice was staring at me. "Ike," she said, "what just happened? Why did she change her mind?" I picked up my fork and took a bite of the cold meatloaf. "Greed, Bea," I said. "It is the only thing stronger than her hatred." I had dangled a shiny object in front of a magpie, and she had snatched it up just as I predicted. She wouldn't sell the house now. She wouldn't put us in a home yet. She needed me close. She needed me compliant. She needed me to sign over a $5 million property that she thought was a secret. But she didn't know the land wasn't just dirt. She didn't know I had already transferred the title 3 days ago into an irrevocable charitable trust for veterans. The paper she stole was real, but the ownership was already gone. If she tried to transfer it, she would be committing fraud on a massive scale. She would be trying to steal federal property. I had just handed her a shovel, and she was about to dig a hole so deep she would never see the sun again. I smiled at my wife. "Eat your dinner, Bea," I said. "We are going to be just fine." But the game wasn't over. Now that she was hungry, she would be dangerous. I had to play the part of the fool for just a little longer. I had to let her think she was winning, right up until the moment the handcuffs clicked. The knock on the door came at 10 in the morning on Saturday. It wasn't the heavy, authoritative pounding of a lawyer or a landlord. It was a gentle, rhythmic rapping, the kind of knock you expect from a neighbor bringing over a pie. I was sitting in my armchair reading the newspaper with a magnifying glass, fully committed to the role of the failing patriarch. Beatrice was in the kitchen humming a hymn, though I knew her hands were gripping the dish towel tight enough to tear it. I opened the door to find Jessica standing there. The transformation was so complete it was almost terrifying. The woman who had sneered at my furniture and threatened to throw us into a state facility was gone. In her place was a vision of contrition. She wore a soft pastel cardigan instead of her usual power suits. Her hair was loose. She held a massive bouquet of lilies in one arm and a basket of gourmet chocolates in the other. Dante stood behind her, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking like a man who was terrified the floor was about to open up and swallow him whole. "Dad," Jessica cooed, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Can we come in?" I blinked slowly, adjusting my glasses. "Jessica," I asked, letting my voice waver, "is everything okay?" "Oh, Dad," she said, pushing past me with a gentle breeze of floral perfume. "I have been feeling just awful, just terrible. I haven't slept a wink." She walked into the living room and placed the flowers on the coffee table right where she had previously slammed down the guardianship papers. She turned to Beatrice, who had frozen in the kitchen doorway. "Mom," Jessica said, rushing over to hug my wife. Beatrice stiffened, her eyes wide with panic, but she didn't pull away. She let the woman who tried to poison her embrace her. It was the bravest thing I had ever seen. I am so sorry, Jessica gushed, pulling back to look Beatrice in the face. The stress of the business, the holidays. I just snapped. I said things I didn't mean. I was scared for your health, and I let my anxiety get the better of me. Can you ever forgive me? Beatrice looked at me. I gave a barely perceptible nod. Of course, honey, Beatrice said, her voice thin. We are family. Jessica let out a sigh of relief that was as fake as the diamonds on her fingers. Thank you. That means the world to me. I want to make it up to you, both of you. Dante and I want to take you out to dinner tonight. A real dinner. The Chop House downtown. My treat. I hesitated, playing the part. Oh, that sounds expensive, Jessica. We don't have fancy clothes for that. Nonsense, she said, beaming. You look perfect just as you are. Please, Dad. Let us spoil you a little. We have so much to talk about. I looked at Dante. He offered a weak smile. It will be nice, Dad. Just us. Okay, I said. Okay. A nice dinner sounds good. 6 hours later, we were seated in a leather booth at the most expensive steakhouse in Chicago. The lights were low, the waiters wore tuxedos, and the menu didn't list prices. Jessica ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. She poured glasses for everyone, fussing over Beatrice, making sure her water glass was full, cutting her steak for her, as if my wife were an invalid. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She laughed at my old war stories she used to roll her eyes at. She asked Beatrice about her knitting. She touched Dante's arm affectionately. To anyone watching, we looked like the picture-perfect American family enjoying a Saturday night out. But I was watching her eyes. They weren't smiling. They were scanning. They were waiting for the right moment to pivot. She was a cobra swaying to the music, waiting to strike. The moment came over dessert. The waiter had just cleared the plates of cheesecake and creme brulee. Jessica leaned forward, her expression turning serious and confidential. You know, Dad, she began, lowering her voice. Since we cleared the air, Dante and I wanted to talk to you about that paperwork we saw on your desk the other day. I paused with my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. Paperwork, I asked, looking confused. The letter from the bank, Jessica said gently. About the land, the industrial lot. Oh, that, I said, waving my hand dismissively. Just some old dirt. I told you I probably need to pay someone to mow the weeds. Jessica covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cold. Dad, we looked into it for you. Because we care. And we are worried. Worried, I asked. Why taxes? Jessica whispered as if it were a dirty word. Inheritance taxes. Capital gains. The government is greedy, Dad. If something were to happen to you, God forbid, the IRS would take almost half of that land's value, maybe more. They would strip the estate bare. Mom would be left with nothing. She squeezed my hand. We can't let that happen. We promise to protect you. I looked at Beatrice. She was staring at her lap, twisting her napkin. She knew this was the trap. What can we do, I asked, letting panic seep into my voice. I don't want the government to take it. That was supposed to be for rainy days. There is a way, Jessica said, her eyes gleaming. A loophole. If you transfer the asset now while you are still with us into a corporate holding company, we can shelter it. My company JJPR has a real estate arm. If we move the deed into the company name, it becomes a business asset. It is tax exempt for family transfers. It was absolute gibberish, legal nonsense. Transferring a $5 million asset to a failing PR firm wouldn't save taxes. It would just give her $5 million. But she was banking on me being an uneducated laborer who didn't understand finance. She was banking on my fear of the tax man. I looked at Dante. Is that true? Son Dante swallowed hard. He took a sip of water. His hand was shaking. Yeah, Dad, it is. It is a common strategy. Asset protection. He was lying to his father to facilitate a theft. The final nail in the coffin of our relationship. I don't know, I said, scratching my head. It sounds complicated. It is actually very simple, Jessica said, reaching into her designer purse. She pulled out a sleek blue folder. I took the liberty of having my legal team draft the transfer papers. Just in case you wanted to save the estate, it is a standard quitclaim deed. We transfer the land to JJPR and we issue you a promissory note. The land stays in the family, but the government can't touch it. She slid the folder across the table. It sat there between the coffee cups and the sugar bowl. $5 million worth of real estate reduced to a few sheets of paper. I stared at it. I thought about the sweat I had poured into buying that land 40 years ago. I thought about the double shifts, the missed holidays, and I thought about the woman sitting across from me who wanted to steal it all to pay for her mistakes. I reached out and opened the folder. I pretended to read it squinting. "And this will protect Beatrice?" I asked. "It guarantees her future," Jessica said solemnly. "It ensures she will never have to worry about money again." That part, ironically, was true, just not in the way she thought. I picked up the pen she offered. I hovered it over the signature line. Jessica stopped breathing. Her eyes were fixed on the tip of the pen. She was so close. She could taste the salvation. $2 million to the Sharks, $3 million for herself. She was already spending it. I hesitated. I pulled the pen back. Jessica flinched. "What is it?" "Dad, is something wrong?" "No," I said slowly. "It is just..." This seems like a big occasion, a big business deal. I have never done a business deal like this before. "It is just paperwork," Dad Dante said, his voice tight. "Just sign it." "No," I said firmly. "I want to do it right. You know, when I started my contracting business, I signed the incorporation papers with a glass of champagne. It is bad luck to sign important papers in the dark." I looked at Jessica. I saw the frustration bubbling behind her eyes, but she tamped it down. She couldn't push too hard. She had to keep the fish on the hook. "What do you suggest?" she asked, her smile tight. "Well," I said, leaning back, "you mentioned you are having a big New Year's Eve party for your company next week. A gala. All your partners, all your investors." "Yes," she said slowly. "It is a very important night for JJPR. I think we should do it there," I said, smiling broadly. "I want to sign this in front of everyone. I want to make a toast. I want to tell all your important friends how smart my daughter-in-law is, how she saved the family legacy. I want to give you the credit you deserve, Jessica." I saw the vanity flare up in her eyes. It battled with her greed, and vanity won. She imagined the scene. The investors who had been doubting her, the creditors who were breathing down her neck. They would see her closing a $5 million asset acquisition live on stage. It would restore confidence in her firm instantly. It would make her the star of the night. That is a wonderful idea, Dad," she said, her voice breathless. "A signing ceremony. We can do it right before the ball drops. It will be the highlight of the night." "Exactly," I said. "We start the new year with a clean slate." I pushed the folder back to her. "Keep it safe until then. I will bring my lucky pen." She took the folder, her hands trembling with excitement. She didn't see the trap. She was too blinded by the spotlight I had just offered her. She didn't realize I wasn't offering her a victory lap. I was offering her a public execution. We finished our coffee. Jessica paid the bill with a flourish, using one of the credit cards she had likely paid down with the money Dante stole from our home equity. We walked out into the cold Chicago night. The wind was biting, but I didn't feel it. I felt a fire burning in my gut. "See you next week," Jessica said, kissing my cheek. "It is going to be a night to remember. You have no idea," I thought. I drove Beatrice home in silence. When we got inside, she collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted from the strain of the performance. "Ike," she whispered. "Why did you do that? Why are we going to her party?" I sat beside her and took her hand. "Because, I said. If we destroy her in private, she can spin the story. She can lie. She can play the victim. But if we do it in front of every person she cares about, in front of the people she owes money to, in front of the people she tries to impress, then she can never recover." I looked at the calendar. 5 days until New Year's Eve. 5 days to finalize the evidence. 5 days to prepare the real paperwork. "She thinks she is getting a $5 million property," I said quietly. "But she is getting a one-way ticket to a cell." I went to my study and called Arthur. "It is set," I told him. "New Year's Eve, the midnight gala. Make sure the police are on standby. And Art, make sure you bring the projector. I have a video everyone needs to see." The stage was set. Jessica wanted to be the center of attention. I was going to make sure she got exactly what she wanted. And when the clock struck 12, her carriage wasn't just going to turn into a pumpkin. It was going to explode. Tuesday morning broke with a sky the color of a bruised plum. It was 2 days before New Year's Eve. 2 days before the trap I had set would snap shut on my daughter-in-law. But before I pulled the trigger, there was one loose end I had to tie. One ghost I had to lay to rest. I called Dante at 7. I told him I wanted to go fishing. Not on a boat just off the pier at Montrose Harbor like we used to when he was a boy and I was trying to keep him off the streets. He hesitated. I could hear him calculating the cost of his time, wondering if spending 3 hours in the freezing cold with his old man was worth it. But then he remembered the land. He remembered the $5 million he thought I was about to sign over to his wife. He had to keep the golden goose happy. "I will be there, Dad," he said. I stood at the end of the pier, the wind off Lake Michigan cutting through my coat like a knife. I baited my hook, my fingers numb but steady. I wasn't really fishing for perch. I was fishing for a soul. I needed to know once and for all if there was anything left of my son inside the man who wore his face. I needed to know if he was a hostage to his wife's ambition or a willing accomplice to her crimes. Dante arrived 20 minutes late. He was wearing a designer wool coat and Italian leather loafers completely inappropriate for the weather. He shivered as he walked toward me, his hands jammed deep into his pockets. He looked miserable. He looked like a man who was being eaten alive from the inside out. "Hey, Dad," he said, his breath pluming in the air. "It is freezing out here. Can we make this quick?" I didn't look at him. I stared at the gray water, watching the bobber dance on the waves. "Grab a rod, Dante," I said, "just for a little while." He sighed, a sound of pure petulance, but he picked up the spare rod I had leaned against the railing. He didn't bait it. He just held it, staring at the horizon. We stood in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound was the wind and the slap of water against the concrete. "You know," I said softly, "I remember when you caught your first fish here. You were 6. You were so excited you almost fell in. You made me promise not to let it go. You wanted to keep it in the bathtub." Dante let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I remember. I was a stupid kid." "You weren't stupid," I said. "You were soft. You had a good heart. You cried when we had to gut it." I turned to look at him. His profile was sharp, handsome, but there were lines of stress etched around his mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. "What happened to that heart, Dante?" I asked. He stiffened. "What is that supposed to mean?" I reeled in my line a few inches. "I know about the money, son." He froze. He turned to me, his eyes wide with panic. "What money? I know about the debts," I said calmly. "I know Jessica's company is underwater. I know you took out a second mortgage on the condo." "My condo." Dante's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Who told you that? Were you spying on me?" "It doesn't matter how I know," I said. "What matters is that you are in trouble. Deep trouble. $2 million worth of trouble." He gripped the fishing rod so hard I thought it would snap. "It is just a cash flow problem," he spat out. "A temporary liquidity issue. Once the deal with the land goes through, everything will be fine. We will pay off the mortgage. We will be back on top." I looked at him with pity. He really believed that. He really believed that selling his father's legacy was a valid business strategy. "Dante," I said, "why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you ask for help? Why did you steal the equity from your mother's home?" He threw the rod down on the concrete. It clattered loudly, a violent sound in the quiet morning. "Ask for help," he shouted, his voice cracking. You are a retired contractor. Dad, you live on a pension. What were you going to do? Give me $50 and a pat on the back." I looked at him steadily. "I would have given you everything I had, Dante, if you had been honest." "Honest?" He laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about honesty? You are the one sitting on a $5 million property while I am drowning. You watched me struggle for years. You watched me stress over bills trying to give Jessica the life she deserves, and you had a winning lottery ticket sitting in your desk drawer the whole time." He stepped closer to me, his face twisted with resentment. "You hid it, Dad. You let me suffer. You let me feel like a failure while you were sitting on a gold mine. And now you want to judge me for borrowing against the condo. I deserve that money. I earned it by putting up with your mediocrity for 35 years. The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't desperation speaking. This was entitlement. This was a man who believed the world owed him a living and that his parents were simply banks that had failed to dispense cash fast enough. "I didn't raise you to be a thief, Dante," I said quietly. "I am not a thief," he screamed. "I am a businessman, and I am doing what I have to do to save my family." "Your family?" I asked. "Beatrice is your family. I am your family." "Jessica is my family," he retorted. "She is my future. You and Mom are the past. You had your time." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the winter wind. He had chosen. He had drawn the line in the sand. "Is that why you let her do it?" I asked. Dante paused. "Do what? Is that why you let her poison your mother?" The silence that followed was absolute. The wind seemed to stop. The water went still. Dante stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't pretend to be confused. He knew exactly what I was talking about. For a moment I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. Just a flicker. But then he crushed it. He buried it under layers of rationalization and greed. "She didn't mean to hurt her," he muttered, looking away. "It was supposed to be mild. Just enough to show that Mom needed care." "Care?" I asked, my voice rising. "She gave her an antipsychotic drug, Dante. A banned substance. She could have killed her. Beatrice has a weak heart. If that drug had interacted with her insulin..." "But it didn't," Dante shouted, throwing his hands up. "Nothing happened. Well, nothing happened to Mom. Jessica was the one who got hurt. Jessica was the one humiliated in front of everyone. Because I swapped the glasses," I said. Dante looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "I knew it. I knew you did something. You old bastard." I stepped closer to him. "I am the bastard. You stood there and watched your wife drop a pill into your mother's drink. You watched her toast to her health knowing that glass was full of poison. And you said nothing." Dante didn't back down. He stepped into my space, his face inches from mine. "We needed the money. Dad, can't you get that through your head? Jessica owes people who don't take excuses. If we didn't get control of the assets, if we didn't get the insurance money..." He stopped. He realized he had said too much. "The insurance money," I repeated. "The accidental death policy." Dante looked away, his jaw working. "You were going to let her kill us," I whispered. "You were going to let her stage an accident. It wasn't going to be painful." Dante mumbled, his voice devoid of emotion. "Just quick. A fall. Or a gas leak. Mom wouldn't have known. She is happy, Dad. She has lived a good life. But Jessica has so much ahead of her. She has potential. She is building an empire." I stared at him. I tried to find my son. I tried to find the boy who cried over a fish. But he wasn't there. The thing standing in front of me was a hollow shell filled with rot and greed. He was justifying matricide because his wife wanted to be a CEO. He was weighing his mother's life against a balance sheet and finding her wanting. Jessica needed the money more than Mom needed her dignity, Dante said, his voice flat. More than she needed her life. "That is just the math, Dad. It is just business." My heart didn't break. It turned to stone. It calcified in my chest, heavy and cold and impenetrable. I looked at the man I had named after a poet, hoping he would bring beauty into the world, and I saw only ugliness. I realized then that my son had died a long time ago. Maybe he died when he met Jessica. Maybe he died when he tasted his first easy dollar. It didn't matter. The man on the pier was a stranger, and he was a stranger who wanted me dead. I turned back to the water. I reeled in my line, the empty hook flashing in the gray light. "You are right, Dante," I said. "It is just business." Dante looked relieved. He thought I was accepting it. He thought I was capitulating to his twisted logic. "So we are good?" he asked. For the party, for the signing, I placed my rod against the railing. I looked at him one last time. I memorized his face, not because I wanted to remember him, but because I wanted to be sure I never hesitated when I destroyed him. "We are good," I lied. "Bring the papers. Bring the notary. We will sign everything on New Year's Eve." Dante smiled. It was a weak, pathetic smile. "Thanks, Dad. You won't regret this. Jessica is going to take good care of the legacy." I nodded. "I am sure she will." I picked up my tackle box. I didn't offer him a ride. I didn't hug him. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked away. "Dad," he called out as I reached the end of the pier. "Aren't you going to stay?" I didn't turn around. I kept walking, my boots heavy on the pavement. "I have things to do, Dante," I said to the wind. "I have a funeral to prepare for." He thought I meant my own. He thought I was preparing to sign away my life. He didn't know I was preparing to bury him. I got into my truck and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I allowed myself one single tear. One tear for the boy who used to fish with me. One tear for the father I used to be. Then I wiped it away. The time for tears was over. The time for mourning was done. My son was dead. The enemy was alive. And in 3 days I was going to introduce the enemy to the consequences of war. I started the engine and drove away, leaving Dante standing alone on the pier, shivering in his expensive coat, waiting for a ship that was never going to come in. The invitation was printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold-embossed lettering that caught the light. It felt expensive in my hand, heavy with the weight of money my son did not actually have. It invited us to the midnight gala at the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton, a black tie affair to celebrate the strategic expansion of JJPR and the ushering in of a prosperous new year. I read the words and felt a dry, humorless laugh bubble up in my throat. Strategic expansion. That was corporate speak for stealing $5 million from your father-in-law to pay off a loan shark before he breaks your legs. Jessica had gone all out. She had rented one of the most historic venues in Chicago. She had hired a 10-piece jazz orchestra. She had ordered cases of champagne that cost $300 a bottle. She was betting everything on this night. She believed that by midnight she would be the owner of a prime commercial estate, her debts would be erased, and she would be the toast of the city. She was building a stage for her triumph, constructing a pedestal so high that she could look down on everyone who had ever doubted her. She didn't realize she was actually building a scaffold. It was 10 in the morning on New Year's Eve. While Jessica was likely screaming at florists and micromanaging the catering staff, I was sitting at my dining room table with 2 men who were about to help me dismantle her life. On my left was Mike, my old service buddy and private investigator. He looked tired, his eyes red-rimmed from staring at screens for 48 hours straight, but he had a look of grim satisfaction on his face. On my right was Arthur Henderson, my attorney. Arthur was dressed in a suit that cost more than my truck, and he was arranging a stack of documents with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. "We have it all," Mike said, sliding a thick black binder across the table. It sounded like a brick hitting the wood. I opened it. The first page was a printout of a digital transaction. It was complex, routed through 3 different servers to hide the origin, but Mike had tracked it. "She bought the pills online," Mike explained, pointing to a highlighted line. "An offshore pharmacy that sells without prescriptions. She used a prepaid debit card she bought at a gas station 3 miles from her office, but she accessed the site from her work computer. We have the IP address, we have the timestamp, and we have the shipping manifest. It was delivered to a P.O. box registered to her maiden name." I turned the page. There was the toxicology report from the lab I had sent the eggnog residue to. It was a perfect match. The chemical compound in the glass was identical to the one she ordered. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mix-up. It was a purchase order for poison. "Keep going," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "Look at the financial section." I flipped to the middle of the binder. It was a forensic accounting of Jessica's company. It was a bloodbath. She had been cooking the books for 2 years. She had inflated her revenue to secure loans. She had created fake clients to show growth. And she had diverted company funds to pay for her personal lifestyle, for the clothes, the cars, the vacations. It was textbook embezzlement and fraud. But the real dagger was the audio file. Mike had cleaned up the recording from the bug I planted in the lawyer's briefcase. He had isolated the voices, removing the engine noise and the static. He handed me a pair of headphones. "Listen to track 4, Mike said. I put them on. I heard Dante's voice, weak and trembling. "What if she doesn't die from the fall? What if she survives?" Then I heard Jessica. Her voice was cold, devoid of any humanity. "Then we finish it at the hospital. We tell them she is confused. We tell them she pulled the plug herself. We make it look like a mercy killing. We have the power of attorney now. We decide when she stops breathing." I took the headphones off. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat. They weren't just thieves. They were monsters. They had discussed murdering Beatrice with the casual tone of people deciding what to order for lunch. "This is enough for a grand jury," Arthur said, tapping the binder. "This is conspiracy to commit murder. This is wire fraud. This is elder abuse. This is 20 years in federal prison, Minimum." "Are the police ready?" I asked. "They are briefed," Mike said. I have a contact in the Major Crimes Division. They have reviewed the preliminary evidence. They will have plainclothes officers at the gala tonight. They are just waiting for the signal. And the papers, I asked Arthur. The ones for the signing ceremony. Arthur smiled a shark-like grin that showed all his teeth. I drafted them myself. They look exactly like the deed transfer she wants. But the legal description of the property, it references a plot of land that doesn't exist. And the fine print, well, let's just say that by signing it, she is acknowledging that she has reviewed the full financial disclosures of the transfer, which include a hidden clause admitting to the fraudulent mortgage on your condo. If she signs that document in front of a notary, she is essentially signing her own confession to bank fraud. It was perfect. It was a trap within a trap. I closed the binder. The weight of it felt good. It felt like justice. "Thank you, gentlemen," I said. "I will see you tonight." They left, and the house fell silent. I sat there for a long time, watching the snow fall outside the window. I thought about the years I had spent raising Dante. I thought about the baseball games, the graduation ceremonies, the pride I felt when he started his own business. I tried to find that love, to find a reason to spare him. But every time I looked for it, I heard Jessica's voice talking about pulling the plug on my wife. I heard Dante's silence. He had made his choice. Now I had to make mine. I stood up and went to the bedroom. Beatrice was sitting on the edge of the bed staring at her dress. It was a navy blue gown she had worn to our 40th anniversary party. It was old, a little out of style, but elegant. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and trust. "Is it time?" she asked softly. "Not yet," I said. "But soon." I went to the closet and pulled out my suit. It wasn't a designer tuxedo. It was a charcoal gray suit I had bought at a department store 10 years ago. It was clean pressed and smelled of cedar. It was the suit of a working man, a man who paid his bills, a man who honored his word. I put it on. I tied my tie, checking the knot in the mirror. I looked at the face staring back at me. The lines were deep. The hair was gray, but the eyes were clear. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a soldier putting on his dress uniform for a court-martial. I turned to Beatrice. "You look beautiful, Bea," I said. She stood up, smoothing the fabric of her dress. She put on her pearl necklace, the one I had given her when Dante was born. Her hand trembled as she clasped it. "I am scared, Ike," she whispered. "What if they make a scene? What if they hurt us?" I walked over to her and took her hands. "They won't hurt us, Bea, because they won't see it coming. Tonight isn't about them. It is about us. It is about taking back our dignity." I went to the safe and took out the final piece of my arsenal. It wasn't a gun, it was a USB drive. On it was the video from the security camera I had bribed the catering staff to recover from the Christmas party venue. It showed the angle no one else saw. It showed Jessica's hand over the glass. It showed the pill dropping. It was grainy, but it was undeniable. I put the drive in my pocket. I checked for the burner phone. I checked for the fake deed. "Ready?" I asked. Beatrice took a deep breath. She squared her shoulders. She was a quiet woman, but she had a spine of steel when she needed it. She nodded. "Ready." We drove to the hotel in my pickup truck. It looked out of place among the limousines and luxury sedans lining the driveway of the Palmer house. The valet looked at the truck with a sneer, but I tossed him a $20 bill and told him to keep it close. We walked into the lobby. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and anticipation. We took the elevator up to the ballroom floor. When the doors opened, the noise of the party washed over us. Jazz music. Laughter. The clinking of glasses. It was the sound of excess. We walked down the long hallway toward the double doors of the grand ballroom. I could see into the room. It was a sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns. A massive ice sculpture of the JJPR logo dominated the center of the room. Champagne flowed like water, and there in the center of it all was Jessica. She was wearing a gold-sequined dress that looked like it was made of liquid metal. She was holding a microphone, laughing at something a donor had said. She looked triumphant. She looked untouchable. Dante was beside her, holding a glass of scotch, looking nervous but relieved. He thought the finish line was in sight. He thought he had survived. I tightened my grip on Beatrice's hand. I felt her squeeze back. "Remember," I whispered. "We walk in with our heads high. We are not the poor relations crashing the party. We are the owners coming to inspect the property." The doorman checked our names on the list. He looked surprised to see us glancing at our clothes, but he opened the doors. We stepped into the ballroom. The lights were dim, casting a golden glow over the crowd. For a moment, no one noticed us. We were just two old people in outdated clothes standing at the edge of the room. But then Dante turned. His eyes locked onto us. He froze. He tapped Jessica on the shoulder. She turned. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then widened into something predatory and bright. She waved at us, beckoning us forward. She wanted us there. She wanted the audience to see the loving family. She wanted witnesses to the signing. I led Beatrice through the crowd. People parted for us, their eyes curious, judging the old suit and the simple dress. I didn't care. I looked straight ahead, my eyes fixed on the stage. We reached the front. Jessica leaned down from the small platform, offering her cheek for a kiss I didn't give. "Dad, Mom," she exclaimed into the microphone, her voice amplified across the room. "I am so glad you made it. Everyone, please give a round of applause for my wonderful in-laws, Isaiah and Beatrice Jefferson." The crowd clapped politely. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stared at her. "Come up here, Dad," Jessica said, gesturing to the stairs. "It is almost midnight. It is time for our big announcement." I squeezed Beatrice's hand one last time, then let go. I walked up the stairs. My steps were heavy, deliberate. I reached the center of the stage. Jessica tried to hand me a glass of champagne. I ignored it. She laughed nervously. "Well, someone is eager to get to business." She turned to the crowd, her face glowing with greed. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "tonight is a special night, not just because it is New Year's Eve, but because we are celebrating a merger of legacy and future. My father-in-law, a man who built his life with his own hands, has graciously decided to entrust his most valuable asset to JJPR, ensuring the future of our family for generations to come." She motioned to a small table set up on the stage. On it was the blue folder I had seen at the restaurant. A notary was standing by, stamp ready. "We are going to sign the transfer right now," Jessica said, her eyes gleaming. "To family." She held out a gold pen. I took the pen. I looked at the crowd. I looked at Dante, who was sweating profusely. I looked at Jessica. And then I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out my reading glasses. I pulled out the microphone from the stand. Jessica looked confused. "Dad." "Just sign here." I looked at the room. The investors. The partners. The elite. "I am not signing anything, Jessica," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, deep and steady. The room went silent. The jazz band stopped playing. Jessica's smile vanished. "What are you doing?" she hissed, moving to cover the mic. "You are embarrassing me." I stepped away from her reach. "I am not here to sign over my land," I said to the crowd. "I am here to tell you a story, a Christmas story." Dante stepped forward. "Dad, stop. You are confused. Let's go downstairs." I pointed a finger at him. "Stay back, Dante." I turned back to the audience. "It is a story about a glass of eggnog," I said, "and a pill, and a son who sold his mother's life for a down payment." Jessica lunged for me. She tried to grab the microphone, her nails clawing at my arm. "Cut the feed," she screamed at the sound technician. "Cut it now." But the sound guy didn't move. He was looking at the back of the room where Mike was standing with his arms crossed, shaking his head. I looked at Arthur, who was standing near the projector screen they had set up for Jessica's company reel. He gave me a nod. "I didn't come to sign a deed," I said, my voice rising over Jessica's screams. "I came to show you a movie." I signaled Arthur. The screen behind me flickered to life. It wasn't the JJPR logo. It was grainy black and white footage. It was a view from a security camera high up in the corner of a room. It showed a woman in a red dress standing over a bowl of eggnog. It showed her looking around. It showed her hand reaching into her pocket. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the ballroom. It showed the pill dropping into the glass. Jessica froze. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. Her face went from red to gray in a heartbeat. That is fake," she shrieked. "That is a deep fake." He made it up, but the video continued. It showed me stepping out of the shadows. It showed the swap. I looked at Jessica. "Happy New Year, Jessica," I said, and then the doors at the back of the room burst open. But it wasn't waiters with more champagne. It was the police. The spotlight blinded me for a second as I stepped onto the platform. It was hot, white, and intense, designed to make the person standing in its center feel like a star. But to me, it felt like an interrogation lamp. Jessica stood there radiant in her gold sequined dress, her smile fixed in place like a porcelain mask. She extended a hand toward me, her manicured nails glinting under the lights. She looked like the picture of a dutiful, loving daughter-in-law welcoming the patriarch into the fold. But I saw the tremor in her fingers. I saw the sheen of sweat on her upper lip. She was terrified that at the last second the fish would spit the hook. "Ladies and gentlemen," she boomed into the microphone, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. "Please give a warm welcome to the man who made all of this possible. My father-in-law, Isaiah Jefferson, a man of vision, a man of generosity, a truly great father who understands that the future belongs to those brave enough to seize it." The applause was polite, rippling through the room of investors and partners who were more interested in the open bar than the family drama. But they clapped. They played along. They thought they were witnessing a business transaction, a passing of the torch. They didn't know they were witnessing an autopsy. I reached the center of the stage. There was a small podium set up draped in velvet. On it lay the blue folder containing the transfer deed for the $5 million property. Next to it was a gold fountain pen, heavy and expensive. It was a prop. Everything here was a prop. Jessica gestured to the pen, her eyes wide and pleading. "Just sign it," her eyes screamed. "Just sign it and save me." I looked at the pen, I looked at the folder, then I looked out at the crowd. I saw Dante standing near the front, clutching his glass of scotch like a lifeline. He looked pale, his eyes darting between me and his wife. He knew something was wrong. He knew his father didn't do speeches. He knew I didn't do grand gestures. But he was paralyzed by his own greed, hoping against hope that I was just a senile old man enjoying his moment in the sun. I reached out, but I didn't take the pen. I took the microphone from the stand. Jessica's smile faltered. Her hand twitched toward me, but she pulled it back. She couldn't wrestle me for the mic in front of her investors. She had to play along. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the speakers. "What are you doing?" "Just sign the papers." I ignored her. I turned to the room. The silence spread from the front row to the back like a wave. The jazz band lowered their instruments. The waiters stopped pouring champagne. Everyone sensed the shift in the air. The tension was palpable, electric. "I am not here to sign these papers," I said. My voice was deep, steady, the voice of a man who had given orders in combat. A murmur went through the crowd. Jessica stiffened beside me. She took a half step forward, her smile now looking like a rictus of pain. "Ha ha ha. Dad is such a joker." She laughed nervously into the air, trying to lean toward the mic. "He loves to tell stories, but we really are on a tight schedule." I pivoted, putting my shoulder between her and the microphone. I looked directly at Mr. Sterling, the CEO who had been at the Christmas party, the man who had walked out in disgust when Jessica had her meltdown. He was here tonight because Jessica had begged him, promised him that tonight would restore his faith in the company. He was watching me intently. "I am here to tell you a story." I continued, my voice rising over Jessica's nervous laughter. "It is a story about Christmas. It is a story about a glass of eggnog. And it is a story about a pill." Jessica gasped. It was a sharp, audible sound. She lunged for me. She forgot the investors. She forgot the image. She realized in that split second that I knew. She realized that the game was up. "Stop him!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He is confused. He is having an episode. Cut the mic." She reached for the microphone stand, her fingers clawing at the metal. She was fast fueled by panic and adrenaline, but I had prepared for this. From the shadows on the left side of the stage, a man stepped forward. He was wearing a black suit and an earpiece. To the audience, he looked like private security hired for the event. To me, he was Mike, the man who had saved my life in a jungle 40 years ago. Mike moved with a speed that belied his age. He intercepted Jessica before she could touch me. He didn't hurt her. He simply stepped into her path, a solid wall of muscle and discipline. He blocked her arm with his forearm, a gentle but immovable barrier. "I am sorry, ma'am," Mike said, his voice calm and professional, loud enough to be heard by the front row. "Please let Mr. Jefferson finish his speech." "Get out of my way," Jessica screamed, pushing at him. "Do you know who I am? This is my party. He is senile. He is lying." Dante ran toward the stage steps. "Dad, stop this. Get down here." I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had mortgaged my home to pay for this charade. "Stay where you are, Dante," I commanded. The command in my voice froze him on the bottom step. I turned back to the crowd. Jessica was struggling against Mike, but he held her back effortlessly, looking bored. The audience was transfixed. Phones were out. They were recording. This wasn't a business merger anymore, it was a spectacle. Last week at my son's home, I stood in the hallway. I said into the mic, I watched a woman in a red dress prepare a drink for my wife. My wife Beatrice, who has treated this woman like a daughter for 5 years. Beatrice, who knits blankets for charity. Beatrice, who has a heart condition. The room was deadly silent. You could hear the ice melting in the sculpture. I saw this woman take a blister pack from her pocket. I continued. I saw her drop a white pill into the eggnog, a pill that wasn't prescribed, a pill meant for severe psychosis, a pill meant to confuse, to disorient, to mimic dementia. Liar, Jessica screamed, her face twisted and ugly. He is lying. He is crazy. Security. Where is the real security? Mike just stood there, a stone statue. She stirred it in, I said, my eyes scanning the faces of the investors. She smiled, and then she walked across the room and handed that poison to my wife. She toasted to her health while waiting for her to collapse. The crowd gasped. I saw Mr. Sterling cover his mouth with his hand. I saw wives clutching their husbands. But she made a mistake. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that roared through the speakers. She took her eyes off the glass for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds I swapped them. Jessica stopped fighting Mike. She went still. Her face drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax figure. She stared at me, her eyes wide, realizing the full extent of what I was saying. She realized why she had hallucinated. She realized why she had attacked the tree. It wasn't stress, it wasn't alcohol. It was her own poison. She drank it, I said. She drank the poison she meant for Beatrice. And you all saw what happened next. You saw the madness. You saw the rage. That wasn't a breakdown, ladies and gentlemen. That was justice. You old bastard, Dante shouted from the floor. You admitted it. You poisoned my wife. I looked down at him. No, son. I saved your mother. The crowd was murmuring now, a low roar of confusion and shock. Jessica seized on the confusion. He is admitting he drugged me, she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. Arrest him. He is dangerous. He is making this up to cover his tracks. I looked at Arthur, my lawyer, who was standing by the tech booth. He gave me a thumbs up. She says I am making it up, I said to the room. She says I am a confused old man. She says there is no proof. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. I held it up. It glinted under the stage lights. But I am a man who believes in insurance, I said. I tossed the drive to Arthur. He caught it and plugged it into the laptop connected to the massive projection screen behind me. The screen that was displaying the JJPR logo flickered. The logo disappeared. Wait, Jessica screamed. Don't. But it was too late. The screen went black for a second, then flared to life with a grainy black and white image. It was footage from a high-angle security camera nestled in the corner of Dante's living room ceiling. A camera I knew was there because I had helped install the security system 3 years ago. The image was clear enough. It showed the drink station. It showed Jessica in her red dress. The timestamp in the corner read December 24th, 8:12 p.m. The room watched in horrified fascination. On the massive screen 10 feet tall, Jessica looked around the room furtively. Her hand dipped into her pocket. She pulled out the silver blister pack. The light caught the foil. She popped the pill. She dropped it into the glass. The collective gasp from the audience sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was undeniable. It was raw. It was criminal. Then the video showed me. It showed me stepping out of the shadows. It showed my hand, quick and steady, switching the glasses. The video ended. The screen froze on Jessica's face as she raised the poisoned glass to her lips. I lowered the microphone. I looked at Jessica. She was slumped against Mike's arm, her legs having given out. She was staring at the screen, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her career was over. Her reputation was ash. Her life was burning down around her, and every person she needed to impress was watching the flames. I walked over to her. I leaned in close so only she could hear me, though the mic picked up the whisper. You wanted the spotlight, Jessica, I said. Now you have it. The doors at the back of the ballroom banged open. The heavy thud of boots echoed on the floor. Police, a voice shouted. Nobody move! 6 officers in uniform marched into the room, followed by 2 detectives in suits. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the stage. Dante tried to run. He turned toward the kitchen exit, but a plainclothes officer stepped out from behind a curtain and blocked his path. Jessica didn't run. She couldn't. She just slid down to the floor, her gold dress pooling around her like fool's gold weeping into her hands as the flashing blue lights from the police cruisers outside bounced off the ballroom windows. The party was officially over. The video on the massive screen froze on the image of Jessica's hand hovering over the glass, the white pill a blur of motion against the red silk of her dress. The silence in the ballroom was shattered by a collective roar of disbelief. It started as a gasp, a sharp intake of breath from 300 people simultaneously realizing they were witnessing a crime, and then it exploded into a cacophony of whispers, shouts, and the frantic clicking of camera shutters. The investors, the partners, the elite of Chicago society who had come here to celebrate a merger were now documenting a downfall. Jessica did not go quietly. She screamed. It was a sound that tore through the microphone feedback, a high-pitched shriek of denial that grated on the nerves. "It is fake," she yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the screen behind me. "He doctored it. That is deep fake technology. He is a sick old man who hates me. Don't you see what he is doing? He is trying to frame me." She looked out at this crowd, her eyes wide and manic, searching for a friendly face, searching for anyone who would buy the lie. "Mr. Sterling," she pleaded, leaning over the edge of the stage toward the CEO, "you know me. You know I would never do this. This is a setup. Please tell them." But Mr. Sterling did not speak. He stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone, looking from the screen to the woman he had almost given millions of dollars to. He took a slow, deliberate step back, putting distance between himself and the contagion of her reputation. Dante, who had been frozen at the foot of the stairs, suddenly snapped. The shock that had paralyzed him gave way to a blind, animalistic rage. He didn't see the evidence. He didn't see the truth. All he saw was his father standing on a pedestal, holding the match that had just burned down his future. "You ruined us!" Dante roared. He charged up the stairs. He wasn't a fighter. He was a soft man who paid other people to solve his problems, but desperation gave him a reckless speed. He rushed at me, his hands reaching for my throat, his face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. "Dad, stop it!" he screamed, lunging across the stage. "I will kill you!" The crowd screamed. Beatrice covered her eyes. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched him come, feeling a profound, hollow sadness. This was my son. This was the boy I had carried on my shoulders. And now he wanted to strangle me to protect a lie, but he never reached me. Mike stepped out from the shadows again. He moved with the fluid efficiency of a man who had disarmed combatants in war zones. He didn't strike Dante. He simply intercepted him. He caught Dante's arm, used the boy's own momentum against him, and spun him around, pinning his arm behind his back and forcing him face first onto the polished wood of the stage. Dante cried out in pain and shock, his cheek pressed against the floorboards, his expensive tuxedo straining at the seams. "Let me go!" Dante shouted, kicking his legs uselessly. "He is lying. He is lying about everything." Mike held him down with one hand, looking bored. "Stay down, kid," Mike rumbled. "You are only making it worse." I looked down at my son. He was struggling, spitting, cursing my name. "You say I am lying, Dante," I said into the microphone. "You say this video is a fabrication. You say you and your wife are innocent victims." I turned to Arthur, my lawyer. He was ready. He tapped a key on his laptop. The image of the poisoned drink vanished from the screen. It was replaced by a waveform, a visual representation of sound. "Then let's listen to the truth," I said. The speakers crackled, and then Dante's voice filled the room. It wasn't the screaming voice of the man on the floor. It was the hushed, conspiratorial voice of a man sitting in a luxury car plotting murder. "What about the other thing the recording played? The insurance." Then Jessica's voice clear as a bell. I found the policy in his desk drawer. "Beatrice has a life insurance policy, $500,000. So the recorded Dante asked. "So it has a double indemnity rider," the recorded Jessica answered. "If she dies of natural causes, it is 500. But if she dies of an accidental death, a fall, a fire, a car crash, it pays out 1 million. The ballroom went deathly quiet again. This was worse than the video. The video showed an assault. This showed intent. This showed the cold-blooded calculation of a son weighing his mother's life against a payout. "You are not suggesting what I think you are," the recorded Dante stammered. "If she were to have an accident," Jessica's voice purred from the speakers. "If she were to say, fall down those steep stairs in the condo, or leave the gas on, no one would question it. Not after what happened at the Christmas party." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of 300 people realizing they were standing in a room with monsters. I looked at the crowd. I saw faces pale with horror. I saw people covering their mouths. I saw the reality of who my son was sinking in. Dante stopped struggling on the floor. He went limp under Mike's grip. He knew. He knew that voice. He knew that conversation. He knew there was no spin, no lie, no PR strategy that could fix this. Jessica stood alone on the other side of the stage. She was trembling violently. She looked at the speakers as if they were demons. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, to scream again, but no sound came out. The air had been sucked out of her lungs by the weight of her own words. Then the movement began. It started with Mr. Sterling. He turned around, signaled to his associates, and began to walk toward the exit. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He just left. It triggered an exodus. The investors, the partners, the socialites, they all turned their backs. The sound of hundreds of footsteps echoed on the marble floor. They were fleeing. They were running away from the stench of scandal, desperate to disassociate themselves from the Jefferson name. "Wait," Jessica whispered, reaching out a hand toward the retreating backs of her financiers. "Please wait. We can explain. It is out of context." But no one stopped. No one looked at her. She was radioactive. Within minutes, the ballroom was half empty. The dream of the midnight gala, the strategic expansion, the $5 million deal, it was all dissolving like smoke. I looked at Dante. Mike pulled him up to his knees. My son looked up at me, his eyes red, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he choked out. "Dad, please. I didn't mean it. I never would have let her do it. I was just listening. Listening." I repeated, my voice filled with a sorrow so deep it felt like drowning. "You listened to her plan to kill your mother, and you didn't call the police. You didn't warn us. You just asked how much the policy paid out." "I didn't think she was serious," Dante sobbed. "We were just desperate. The debt is yours, Dante," I said, "and now the consequences are yours too." The main doors of the ballroom burst open again. This time it wasn't guests leaving. It was the law arriving. 6 uniformed officers marched into the room, their hands resting on their belts. Behind them walked 2 detectives in cheap suits, the same men Mike had briefed earlier that day. They moved with purpose, scanning the room, their eyes locking onto the stage. "Police," one of the detectives shouted, holding up a badge. "Stay where you are." The remaining guests scattered to the walls, clearing a path. The officers marched down the center aisle, their boots heavy on the floor. Jessica let out a wail of despair. She sank to her knees, her gold dress pooling around her. She looked small. She looked pathetic. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and realized she couldn't glue it back together. Dante tried to stand up, but Mike held him firm. "It is over, son," I said softly. The detectives walked up the stairs to the stage. One of them, a tall woman with a stern face, walked straight to Jessica. "Jessica Jefferson," she said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." Jessica didn't fight. She couldn't. She held out her wrists, her head hanging low, her sobs racking her body. The metal cuffs clicked shut, the sound echoing through the microphone that was still live. The other detective walked over to Dante. Mike stepped back, releasing him. "Dante Jefferson," the detective said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and being an accessory to a felony." Dante looked at me. His eyes were pleading. "Dad, do something. Tell them. Tell them I am your son." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sold us out. "I don't have a son," I said, my voice steady, broadcast to the entire room. "My son was a good man. He died a long time ago." Dante's face crumpled. He let out a sob that was more sound than breath as the detective spun him around and cuffed his hands behind his back. I watched them. I watched the police drag them away. Jessica was screaming now, blaming Dante, blaming me, blaming the world. Dante was weeping, calling out for his mother. Beatrice stood at the foot of the stage. She was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth. She watched her son being led away in chains. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to endure. But she didn't run to him. She didn't try to stop them. She stood her ground. The police led them out the side exit, away from the cameras of the few lingering guests who were still live-streaming the disaster. The sirens outside wailed a chorus of judgment in the winter night. The ballroom was almost empty now. The ice sculpture was melting dripping water onto the floor. The champagne was warm. The party favors lay abandoned on the tables. I put the microphone back on the stand. It made a dull thud. I walked down the stairs to Beatrice. I took her into my arms. She buried her face in my chest and wept for the son we had lost, for the betrayal we had survived. "Let's go, B," I whispered. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving the wreckage of our son's ambition behind us. We walked past the stunned hotel staff, past the whispering onlookers in the lobby. We walked out into the cold, clean air of the Chicago night. The new year had arrived. The clock had struck midnight while my son was being read his rights. It was a new beginning, a painful one, a lonely one. But it was clean. The poison was gone. The threat was neutralized. I opened the door of my truck for my wife. I helped her in. I walked around to the driver's side and got in. I started the engine. As we drove away from the hotel, I didn't look back. I looked at the road ahead. It was dark, but the headlights cut through the gloom. We were survivors. We were together. And for the first time in a long time, we were safe. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. It was a mechanical, final sound, like a vault door slamming shut on a life that used to exist. The detective, a man with a face carved out of granite and eyes that had seen too much of the city's darkness, didn't offer an apology. He didn't offer a polite request for cooperation. He simply grabbed Jessica's wrist, twisted it behind her back with practiced efficiency, and snapped the metal ring tight against her skin. Jessica let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the noise of a trapped animal realizing the cage was real. She looked down at the metal binding her wrists, her gold-sequined dress shimmering incongruously under the harsh stage lights. The illusion of the powerful CEO, the benevolent daughter-in-law, the Queen of Chicago society, dissolved instantly. In her place stood a criminal. Jessica Jefferson, the detective, read from a small notepad, his voice bored and monotone. "You are under arrest for aggravated battery with a controlled substance conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." Jessica's head snapped up. Her eyes were wild, darting from the detective to the crowd, and finally landing on Dante, who was being held by two uniformed officers a few feet away. The reality of the charges hit her like a physical blow. Conspiracy to commit murder. That wasn't a white-collar crime. That wasn't something her lawyers could fix with a plea deal and a fine. That was life in a cage. "No," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "No, you don't understand. I didn't do it. I was coerced." She spun around, nearly losing her balance in her high heels, and pointed a shaking finger at Dante. It was him, she screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. It was his idea. He made me do it. He is the one with the gambling debts. He is the one who took out the mortgage on his parents' house. I was just trying to help him. I was scared of him. Dante looked at her, his mouth hanging open in shock. The woman he had worshipped, the woman he had betrayed his own blood for, was throwing him to the wolves without a second of hesitation. "Jessica, what are you saying?" Dante stammered, tears streaming down his face. "You bought the pills. You planned it." "He forced me," Jessica yelled over him, looking desperately at the detective. "Check his financials. He owes millions. He told me if I didn't help him get his inheritance, the loan sharks would kill us both. I was a victim. I am a victim here." The detective didn't even blink. He had heard it all before. Rats always eat each other when the ship goes down. He signaled to the other officers. "Get him too," the detective said. The officers moved on Dante. They spun him around and cuffed him. Dante didn't fight. He collapsed. His legs gave out, and the officers had to hold him up by his armpits. He was sobbing openly now, huge heaving cries that echoed through the silent ballroom. He looked pathetic. He looked small. "Dante Jefferson." The detective continued reading the rights to my son. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, bank fraud, and being an accessory to a felony." Dante wasn't listening to his rights. He was looking at me. He looked past the police, past the ruin of his wife, and locked eyes with me. I was still standing on the stage, the microphone in my hand, looking down at the wreckage of my family. Beatrice was standing at the foot of the stairs, her hands covering her mouth, tears flowing silently down her cheeks. "Dad," Dante wailed. "Dad, please, tell them I am your son. Tell them I wouldn't hurt you." He tried to lunge toward me, but the officers jerked him back. "Dad, help me," he begged, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "I am scared. I don't want to go to jail. Fix this. You always fix it. Please, Dad, I am your boy. The room watched. The investors, the partners, the elite, they all watched the man who wanted to be a king reduced to a begging child. I looked at him. I looked at the face that used to look like mine. I looked at the eyes that I had once thought held so much promise. I remembered the nights I sat up with him when he had a fever. I remembered teaching him how to tie a tie. I remembered the pride I felt when he graduated college. But then I remembered the recording. I remembered his voice in the car, calm and detached, discussing how to make his mother's death look like an accident. I remembered him standing on the pier telling me it was just business. That memory burned away the last of the pity. It cauterized the wound in my heart. I stepped to the edge of the stage. I looked down at him. The distance between us was only a few feet, but it might as well have been an ocean. I don't have a son named Dante, I said. My voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the ballroom it carried to every corner. Dante stopped crying. He stared at me, his eyes wide. My son was a good man. I continued, my voice steady and cold as winter ice. He was honest. He was kind. He loved his mother. That man died a long time ago. I leaned down slightly, looking him dead in the eye. I don't know who you are, I said. But you are just a stranger who broke into my life and tried to kill my wife. And I don't help strangers who hurt my family. Dante's face crumpled. The hope died in his eyes, replaced by a dark, bottomless despair. He realized finally that there was no safety net. The bank of Dad was closed. The unconditional love had run out. He was alone. Take them away, I said to the detective. The detective nodded. He signaled his team. Jessica began to scream again as they started to drag her toward the exit. She was kicking her heels, scraping against the polished floor, cursing me, cursing Dante, cursing the world. You will pay for this, old man, she shrieked. I will sue you. I will take everything. Dante went quietly. He hung his head, his body limp, allowing the officers to drag him like a sack of grain. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The side doors of the ballroom burst open and the flash of cameras blinded us all. The press had arrived. My lawyer Arthur had tipped them off. He knew that for justice to be truly served, it had to be public. It had to be absolute. The reporters swarmed the police escort. Microphones were shoved into Jessica's face. Cameras zoomed in on her handcuffs, her ruined makeup, her disheveled dress. Ms. Jefferson, is it true you poisoned your mother-in-law? Mr. Jefferson, did you mortgage your parents' home without their consent? The questions were shouted like accusations. Jessica tried to hide her face, but with her hands cuffed behind her back, she had nowhere to hide. Every angle was captured. Every moment of her humiliation was broadcast live to the evening news. They were paraded through the lobby of the Palmer House, past the shocked tourists and the whispering staff. They were shoved into the back of waiting squad cars, the blue and red lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I stood on the stage and watched them go. I watched until the doors closed and the sirens began to wail, fading into the Chicago night. The ballroom was nearly empty now. The guests had fled, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Only the staff remained, cleaning up the shattered glass and the abandoned champagne. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Beatrice. She had climbed the stairs to stand beside me. She looked tired, her face pale, but her eyes were dry. She had watched her son be taken away in chains, and she had survived it. "Is it over, Ike?" she whispered. I put my arm around her shoulders. I looked at the empty room, at the remnants of the party that was supposed to be Jessica's coronation. "The party is over, Bea," I said, "but the cleanup is just beginning." I took the microphone one last time. I placed it gently on the podium next to the unsigned deed. We walked down the stairs together. We walked past the empty tables, past the melting ice sculpture that was now just a puddle of water on the floor. We walked out of the ballroom and into the lobby. Outside, the snow was falling harder. It covered the streets, covering the grime of the city in a blanket of white. It looked clean. It looked new. I breathed in the cold air. It hurt my lungs, but it felt good. It felt like freedom. We had lost a son, but we had kept our souls. And as I helped Beatrice into the truck, I knew that no matter what happened next, no matter how messy the trials or the bankruptcy proceedings got, we had already won the only victory that mattered. We were still standing, and the wolves were in cages. The silence in the ballroom following the departure of the police was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the debris of a shattered dynasty. My lawyer Arthur stood near the podium where the blue folder still lay untouched and unsigned. A few reporters who had lingered, sensing there was one more card to be played, moved closer, their recording devices humming. Beatrice was clinging to my arm, her face pale, looking at the folder as if it were a radioactive isotope. "Ike," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What about the land? What about the $5 million? If they get out on bail, if they try to fight this, do they still get the property?" I looked at Arthur. He smiled, a thin, sharp expression that didn't reach his eyes. He picked up the blue folder. He didn't open it. He simply held it up for the few remaining cameras to see. "This document," Arthur announced, his voice projecting clearly through the room without the need for a microphone, "was the bait for a trap set for a predator. Jessica Jefferson believed she was signing a transfer of deed for a commercial lot at 404 Industrial Way. She believed she was securing her financial future. She believed she was stealing $5 million from a confused old man." He paused, letting the words sink in. He ripped the folder in half. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "But you cannot steal what does not exist," Arthur said, tossing the torn pieces onto the floor. Beatrice looked up at me, confusion warring with relief in her eyes. "Ike, what does he mean? You own that land. We bought it 40 years ago." "I did own it, Bea," I said softly, covering her hand with mine, "until 30 days ago." I turned to the reporters. I wanted this on the record. I wanted Jessica to read it in her cell. I wanted her to know exactly how thoroughly she had been beaten. "Last month," I said, my voice steady, "I signed the final transfer papers for that property. I didn't sell it. I didn't put it in a trust for my ungrateful son. I donated it. Every single acre, every square foot of dirt and concrete. Donated," a reporter asked, stepping forward. "To whom?" "To the Southside Veterans Association," I said. "They are going to build a rehabilitation center for soldiers coming home with PTSD. They are going to build housing for vets who have nowhere else to go." The deal was finalized and recorded with the county clerk 4 weeks ago. The land belongs to the men and women who served this country. It belongs to heroes, not to thieves. The realization rippled through the room. The property Jessica had killed her reputation for, the asset she had tried to poison my wife to obtain the golden ticket she had pinned all her hopes on, hadn't belonged to me for a month. She had committed conspiracy to commit murder for a phantom. She had destroyed her life for a zero balance. "The papers in that folder were worthless," Arthur added, dusting his hands off. "Even if she had signed them, even if Isaiah had signed them, they would have been legally void. She was chasing a ghost." At the police station downtown, the reality of this was about to hit Jessica like a freight train. I wasn't there to see it, but Mike, my private investigator, had a contact in the precinct who filled us in later. Jessica was sitting in interrogation room B, handcuffed to the table, still wearing her ruined gold dress. She was hysterical, trying to cut a deal. She was offering up Dante, offering up her employees, offering up anyone she could throw under the bus. "I need to make a call," she screamed at the detective. "I need to call my lawyer. I have assets. I have a property transfer pending. It is worth $5 million. I can pay bail. I can pay for the best defense team in the city. Just let me make the call." The detective, a veteran officer who had no patience for white-collar criminals who thought they could buy their way out of homicide charges, simply slid a piece of paper across the metal table. It wasn't a phone. It was a printout of the county property records. "You don't have any assets, Mrs. Jefferson," the detective said dryly. "And you definitely don't have a property transfer pending." Jessica grabbed the paper. Her eyes scanned the lines frantically. She saw the transfer date. She saw the new owner, Southside Veterans Association. She saw the date of the transaction. November 30th. She froze. Her brain tried to process the information, but the cognitive dissonance was too great. She had spent the last month plotting. She had spent the last week terrified. She had drugged a woman. She had risked everything, and the prize she was fighting for had been gone before she even mixed the poison. It can't be," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He tricked me. He tricked me." She looked up at the detective, her eyes wide and vacant. He knew the whole time. And then she snapped. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was a laugh. A high, broken, jagged laugh that bubbled up from her chest and tore out of her throat. It was the sound of a mind fracturing under the weight of absolute failure. She laughed until she couldn't breathe. She laughed until tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup even further. She slammed her forehead against the metal table over and over again, howling with laughter. "I did it for nothing," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the concrete walls of the holding cell. "For nothing. It was all for nothing. They had to sedate her. They had to strap her to a chair and wheel her into the psychiatric holding unit because she wouldn't stop laughing." The great Jessica Jefferson, the CEO, the mastermind, had been broken not by prison, but by the sheer crushing irony of her own greed. While Jessica was losing her mind in a cell, the physical dismantling of their empire was happening in real time across the city. The financial world moves faster than the legal one. Bad news travels at the speed of light when money is involved. As soon as the arrest hit the news wires, as soon as the words fraud and embezzlement were linked to Dante and Jessica Jefferson, the creditors pounced. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was immediate. At Dante's mansion, the house they had bought to impress people they didn't like. With money they didn't have, the lights were blazing, but no one was home. The driveway, usually filled with their least luxury cars, became a staging ground for the repo men. Tow trucks with flashing yellow lights backed into the driveway. Men in coveralls hooked chains to the axles of Dante's Mercedes and Jessica's Range Rover. They didn't care about the paint jobs. They didn't care about the heated seats. To them, these were just assets to be recovered against bad debt. The cars were dragged up the ramp, screeching in protest, stripping the rubber from the tires. But that was just the beginning. Mike drove me past the house an hour after we left the hotel. I wanted to see it. I needed to see it. Beatrice stayed in the car, unable to watch, but I rolled down the window. A locksmith was drilling out the front door lock. A representative from the bank stood on the porch with a clipboard overseeing the seizure. Because Dante had leveraged the house to the hilt, because he had used fraudulent documents to secure loans, the bank had invoked an immediate default clause. They weren't waiting for foreclosure proceedings. They were securing the asset because it was a crime scene. The locksmith kicked the door open. The alarm blared for 10 seconds before they cut the power. The house went dark. The Christmas lights on the roof flickered and died. The inflatable Santa on the lawn deflated, collapsing into a heap of plastic on the snow. It was a perfect metaphor. The air had been let out of their life. I watched as a team of movers began to carry things out. Not furniture, evidence. Computers, file cabinets, boxes of documents. The FBI had arrived to secure the paper trail for the federal fraud charges. And then I saw the sign. A real estate agent, shivering in the cold, was hammering a sign into the frozen lawn. It didn't say, "For sale," it said, "Property of the U.S. Marshals Service. Seized asset." Their clothes, their art, their wine cellar, it was all gone. In the span of 4 hours, Dante and Jessica had gone from living in a $3 million home to owning nothing but the jumpsuits on their backs. I looked at the dark house. I thought about the dinners we had eaten there, the tension, the fake smiles. I thought about the Christmas party where Jessica had poisoned my wife. "It is just a building now," Mike said from the driver's seat. "Just bricks and wood." "It was never a home, Mike," I said. "It was a stage set. And the show has been canceled." We drove away. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a deep, exhausting relief. The monster had been slain. The castle had been stormed. The threat to my wife was gone. I reached over and took Beatrice's hand. She was asleep, her head resting against the cool glass of the window. She looked peaceful. For the first time in months, she wasn't furrowing her brow in her sleep. She wasn't worried about being put away. She was safe. The empire of smoke that Jessica and Dante had built had vanished into the wind. They had tried to build a fortune on the foundation of my grave, but they forgot that I was still holding the shovel, and now they were the ones buried under the rubble of their own lies. We drove through the quiet streets of Chicago, leaving the ruins of my son's life in the rearview mirror. I knew there would be court dates. I knew there would be lawyers and testimonies and tears, but the war was won. I looked at the road ahead. It was clear. It was open. And for the first time in a long time, it belonged entirely to us. The silence in our house after the arrest was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a wake. The adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a cold, aching void where our family used to be. For 3 days, Beatrice barely ate. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the photos of Dante on the mantel, the ones I hadn't yet the heart to take down. She wasn't seeing the man who tried to kill her. She was seeing the toddler with the skinned knee. She was seeing the boy in the graduation cap. She was a mother, and the biology of motherhood does not come with an off switch for love, even when that love is weaponized against you. On the fourth morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a letter pad. She was writing to the district attorney. She was trying to draft a request for leniency. She wanted to drop the charges. I poured myself a coffee and sat opposite her. I didn't snatch the pen away. I just watched her hand tremble as she tried to find the words to save the monster we had raised. "He is our son, Ike," she whispered, not looking up. "Prison will kill him. He is soft. He made a mistake. He was influenced by that woman. If we ask them to let him go, maybe he will get probation. Maybe we can get him help." I took a sip of the black coffee. It was bitter, just like the truth I had to force her to swallow. "He didn't make a mistake, Beatrice," I said gently. "He made a plan, and he isn't soft. He watched you drink poison, and he counted the minutes until he could cash the check." She covered her ears. "Stop it. Please stop saying that. He loves me. He was just desperate." I knew then that words weren't enough. Denial is a powerful drug, and Beatrice was overdosing on it to keep her heart from shattering completely. I could tell her 1,000 times that Dante was gone, but she needed to see the thing that had taken his place. She needed to look into the eyes of the man in the cell and realize there was no soul looking back. "Get your coat." "Be," I said, standing up. "Where are we going?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "We are going to see him," I said. "You want to save him? Fine. But before you send that letter, you need to hear what he has to say." The drive to the Cook County Jail was a gray blur of concrete and barbed wire. Beatrice clutched her purse in her lap, her knuckles white. She was nervous, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes that terrified me. She thought she was going to a reconciliation. She thought she was going to find a prodigal son weeping for forgiveness. I knew we were going to an execution of the last shred of her maternal hope. The visitation room was cold, smelling of floor wax and stale sweat. We sat on metal stools in front of a thick pane of plexiglass. The room was filled with the low murmur of other families, mothers crying, wives pleading, children looking confused. Then the door on the other side buzzed open. Dante walked in. He was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was unwashed, sticking up in tufts. He hadn't shaved in 4 days. But it wasn't his appearance that chilled me. It was his walk. He didn't walk with shame. He didn't walk with his head down. He walked with a swagger of aggressive entitlement, scanning the room until his eyes landed on us. He sat down and snatched the receiver off the hook. He didn't wait for us to speak. He glared at us through the scratched glass, his eyes burning with a toxic mix of fury and arrogance. Beatrice picked up her phone, her hand shaking so hard the cord danced. "Dante," she breathed. "Oh, my baby. Are you okay? Are they hurting you?" Dante leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass. "Get me out of here," he hissed. His voice was tinny through the receiver, but the venom was clear. "Get me out of here right now. You did this. You put me in this cage." Beatrice flinched as if he had slapped her. "No, Dante. We didn't. You broke the law." "But I am trying. I am writing a letter to the judge. I am going to tell them it was a mistake." "A mistake?" Dante laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "The only mistake was that I trusted Jessica to handle the dosage. If she had done it right, I would be in the Bahamas right now, and you would be in the ground where you belong." I saw the color drain from Beatrice's face. She gripped the phone tighter, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the earth. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "You are just angry. You are stressed." "Stop it!" Dante shouted, slamming his hand against the partition. The guard behind him took a step forward, but Dante ignored him. "Stop acting like a saint, Mom. You are the villain in this story. You and Dad. You sat on $5 million while I was drowning. You watched me struggle. You watched me beg. You owed me that money. It was my inheritance. It was my birthright, and you gave it to a bunch of strangers just to spite me." I took the phone from Beatrice's frozen hand. I put it to my ear. "We gave you everything, Dante," I said, my voice low and steady. "We gave you an education. We gave you a home. We gave you a love you never deserved. You gave me nothing," he screamed, spittle flying against the glass. "You gave me mediocrity. You wanted me to be a little worker bee like you, Dad. You wanted me to be small. But I am big, I have vision, and you stole my future. You think you are a hero because you caught us. You are just a selfish old man who couldn't die fast enough. I looked at him. I looked for the son I had raised. I looked for a trace of humanity, but there was nothing. Just a black hole of narcissism and greed. He didn't regret trying to kill us. He only regretted that he had failed. Beatrice leaned in close to the glass. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the arrest. She saw the hate. She saw the entitlement. She saw the absolute absence of love. Dante, she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. I would have given my life for you. I would have walked through fire for you. Then get me a lawyer, he interrupted. Sell the other house. Get me bail. Fix this. Beatrice slowly shook her head. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it was the last one. No, she said softly. Dante froze. What did you say? I said no, Beatrice repeated. I am not going to fix this. I can't fix you. I thought you were sick, Dante. I thought you were lost. But you aren't lost. You are exactly where you chose to be. You can't leave me here, Dante yelled, panic finally starting to crack his arrogance. I am your son. You have to help me. Beatrice stood up. She looked tall. She looked strong. The ghost that had been haunting my house for 3 days vanished, replaced by the woman I had married. My son would never have hurt me, she said into the phone. My son would never have wished me dead. You are just a man who looks like him, and I don't owe you anything. She hung up the phone. The click was final. It was the sound of a cord being cut. Dante screamed something we couldn't hear. He slammed the receiver against the glass. He pounded on the partition with his fists, his face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. The guards moved in. They grabbed him by the arms. They dragged him away from the window, kicking and screaming, shouting curses that were silenced by the thick glass. Beatrice didn't watch him go. She turned her back on the window. She looked at me. Her eyes were sad, incredibly sad, but they were clear. Take me home, Ike, she said. We walked out of the prison into the bright, harsh sunlight of the afternoon. Beatrice held my arm, her grip firm. She didn't look back at the gray walls. She didn't look back at the barbed wire. We got into the truck. I started the engine, but I didn't put it in gear. I looked at her. Are you okay? I asked. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cold air. It hurts. Ike, she said, placing her hand over her heart. It hurts more than anything I have ever felt. It feels like he died today. He did, I said. The boy we knew is gone. She nodded slowly. But I am still here, and you are still here, and I am not going to let his hate kill me. I am not going to let him take another minute of my life. She reached over and turned on the radio. Soft jazz filled the cab. It was a small act, a mundane act, but it was a declaration of life. Drive, she said. Let's go find a place where we can breathe. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the lot. The prison receded in the rearview mirror, shrinking until it was just a gray smudge on the horizon. The pain was there, sharp and real, a wound that would scar but never fully disappear. But the infection was gone. The poison had been drawn out. We drove in silence for a long time, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the last few days. It was the silence of healing. It was the silence of two people who had walked through hell and come out the other side burned but unbroken. Dante had wanted to break us. He had wanted to leave us with nothing. Instead, he had stripped away the illusions and left us with the only thing that truly mattered, each other. And as we drove toward the highway, leaving the city and the wreckage of our son's life behind, I knew that we were going to be okay. We were going to survive this, because we were Jeffersons. And Jeffersons don't break. We just rebuild. The for sale sign on the front lawn of our Lincoln Park condo didn't stay up for long. The market was hot, just as Jessica had predicted in her greed, but the money from the sale didn't go into her failing company or her legal defense fund. It went into a cashier's check that sat in my breast pocket, warm against my chest. Walking through the empty rooms of the place we had called home for a decade was harder than I expected. The echoes of our life were everywhere. The scuff mark on the hardwood where Dante had dropped a trophy when he was visiting years ago. The faded square on the wall where our wedding photo had hung. It was a good home, but it had been poisoned. The memory of Dante standing in this living room lying to my face about the second mortgage hung in the air like smoke. We couldn't breathe here anymore. We needed fresh air. We packed only what mattered. The photo albums, Beatrice's knitting supplies, my tackle box. We left the furniture. We left the expensive appliances. We left the things that were just things. We held an estate sale and watched strangers carry away our dining table and our lamps. It felt like shedding a skin. It felt like stripping away the heavy, suffocating layers of a life that had become too complicated. When I handed the keys to the new owners, a young couple expecting their first child, I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I told them to change the locks not because I didn't trust them, but because I wanted to make sure the past could never get back in. We drove north. We didn't have a destination at first, just a direction. Away from Chicago. Away from the courthouse where our son was awaiting trial. Away from the whispers of the neighbors who had seen the news trucks on our lawn. We drove until the skyline of the city was just a gray smudge in the rearview mirror, and then we kept driving until the buildings gave way to trees and the concrete turned into blacktop. We crossed the state line into Wisconsin, the landscape opening up into rolling hills and dense forests. The further we got, the deeper Beatrice breathed. The tension that had held her shoulders tight for months began to unravel. She rolled down the window, letting the cold, clean air hit her face. She looked younger. She looked like the girl I had met before the world got its claws into us. We found the house 3 days later. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a condo in a trendy neighborhood. It was a small A-frame cabin sitting on the edge of a quiet lake tucked away at the end of a gravel road that didn't even have a street sign. It had 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a porch that looked out over the water. It was simple, it was sturdy, it was perfect. The realtor, a local woman who didn't know who we were and didn't care about Chicago gossip, told us it had been on the market for a while because it was too isolated. Most people wanted to be close to town. "We will take it," I said, standing on the porch, listening to the silence. Isolated was exactly what we were looking for. I paid cash, no mortgages, no banks, no paper trails that a greedy relative could track. We moved in the next week. The first night we slept on a mattress on the floor because the bed hadn't been delivered yet. We built a fire in the hearth, the smell of burning pine filling the room, replacing the scent of antiseptic and fear that had clung to us since the hospital. We ate sandwiches on paper plates, sitting on the floor, watching the flames dance. "This is nice, Ike," Beatrice whispered, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It is quiet. It is ours." "B," I said. "Nobody can take this. Nobody knows we are here." The first few months were a time of healing. It wasn't instantaneous. You don't recover from the attempted murder of your wife by your own son overnight. There were bad days. Days when Beatrice would cry for no reason. Days when I would wake up in a cold sweat reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, thinking I heard Jessica's voice in the next room. But those days became fewer and farther between. The rhythm of the lake took over. The sun came up over the water, turning the mist into gold. The birds sang in the trees. The seasons changed, the snow melting into mud, the mud turning into wildflowers. I spent my mornings fixing up the cabin. I repaired the deck. I sealed the windows. I built a small garden shed for Beatrice. Working with my hands, doing honest labor for my own home was therapy. It grounded me. It reminded me that I was still capable, still strong. I wasn't the confused old man I had pretended to be. I was Isaiah Jefferson, and I was building a fortress of peace. Beatrice started a garden. She planted tomatoes, peppers, and rows of marigolds. She spent hours out there, her hands in the dirt, talking to the plants. I watched her from the kitchen window. I saw the color come back to her cheeks. I saw her smile, a real smile, not the brave mask she had worn for so long. She stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes. We had changed our numbers. Only Arthur, Mike, and a few trusted friends had the new ones. The silence from the prison was absolute, and it was a blessing. We made a few friends in the nearby town, simple folks who ran the hardware store and the diner. They knew us as Ike and Bea, the retired couple from the lake. They didn't know about the $5 million land donation. They didn't know about the scandal. To them, we were just neighbors. It was refreshing to be seen as people, not as targets or victims. We went to church on Sundays, sitting in the back pew holding hands. We bought groceries. We lived. One afternoon in late summer, 6 months after we moved in, I took my fishing rod down to the dock. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. The water was glass smooth, reflecting the trees on the opposite shore. I cast my line, the rhythmic whir of the reel, the only sound in the world. I wasn't fishing for anything in particular. I was just being. Beatrice came down a few minutes later. She was carrying 2 glasses of lemonade and a book. She sat in the Adirondack chair I had built for her, placing the drinks on the small table between us. She didn't say anything. She just opened her book and started reading. I looked at her. The golden light caught the silver in her hair. She looked beautiful. She looked safe. I thought about the Christmas party. I thought about the noise, the fake smiles, the poison in the glass. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like a story that had happened to someone else. The anger that had fueled me for so long, the white-hot rage that had driven me to destroy my son's life had cooled. It hadn't disappeared, but it had settled into something manageable. It was a scar now, not an open wound. I realized then that I didn't hate Dante anymore. Hate requires energy. Hate requires attachment. I felt nothing for him. He was a stranger serving time for a crime against strangers. He was a memory of a disappointment. I looked at the water. A fish jumped, breaking the surface, creating ripples that widened until they disappeared. "You know, B," I said softly, keeping my eyes on the bobber, "I think this is the best investment we ever made." Beatrice looked up from her book. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "The house?" she asked. "The piece," I said. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong. "We earned it, Ike," she said. "We fought for it." We sat there as the sun dipped below the tree line. The air cooled. The crickets began to chirp. There were no lawyers here. There were no schemes. There were no pills hidden in pockets. There was just us. 2 people who had weathered the storm and found a harbor. I reeled in my line. I didn't catch anything, but that didn't matter. I wasn't fishing for food. I was fishing for time. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had all the time in the world. "Let's go inside," Old Man Beatrice said, standing up and stretching. "I am making stew." I packed up my gear. I followed my wife up the path to the cabin, the warm yellow light from the windows welcoming us home. I locked the door behind us, not out of fear, but just to keep the warmth in. The world outside could keep spinning. It could keep fighting and screaming and clawing for more. We had enough. We had everything. The mailman only comes down our dirt road 3 times a week. His truck rattles over the gravel, a noisy intruder in the quiet sanctuary we have built. Usually he brings nothing but circulars for the local hardware store or seed catalogs for Beatrice. But today he brought a thick cream-colored envelope with a Chicago return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Arthur, my lawyer. I stood on the porch, the wood warm under my boots from the late afternoon sun, and weighed the envelope in my hand. It felt heavy, dense with legal jargon and the finality of a gavel. I didn't open it right away. I watched Beatrice in the garden. She was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and kneeling on a foam pad, tying up her tomato plants with strips of green cloth. She was singing to herself a soft, tuneless melody that drifted on the breeze. She looked healthy. Her color was good. The shadows that had haunted her eyes for months after the arrest had finally faded, replaced by the calm of a woman who knows she is safe. She was the reason for everything. Every lie I had told, every trap I had set, every bridge I had burned, it was all for her. I sat down on the rocking chair and tore open the seal. The letter was detailed. Arthur never did anything halfway. He outlined the conclusion of the proceedings against Dante and Jessica. I read the words and a cold, grim satisfaction settled in my gut. It had been a bloodbath. Just as I had suspected, prison had not humbled them. It had turned them feral. When the plea deals were offered, the district attorney had pitted them against each other, a classic prisoner's dilemma. But instead of negotiating, they had gone for the throat. Jessica had testified that Dante was the mastermind, claiming he had physically threatened her into buying the poison. She claimed she was a battered wife, a victim of his gambling debts and his rage. She provided the prosecutors with access to a hidden laptop she had stashed in a storage unit, hoping to trade Dante's secrets for her freedom. The laptop contained evidence of Dante's illegal bookie activities, his money laundering, and his identity theft of 3 other seniors he had targeted before us. Dante, in retaliation, had scorched the earth. He gave up Jessica's entire network. He testified about the other investors she had defrauded. He revealed that the poisoning of Beatrice wasn't her first attempt at playing God. He told them about a previous business partner of hers who had mysteriously fallen ill right before a crucial vote. He handed them the keys to every skeleton in her closet. They thought they were buying their freedom. They thought that by destroying the other, they would climb out of the pit. They were wrong. The judge, a woman with a reputation for despising elder abuse, had looked at the mountain of new evidence they had provided against each other and thrown the book at them. The plea deals were revoked. The charges were upgraded. Because of their mutual testimony, they had exposed the depth of their depravity. They weren't just desperate debtors, they were career criminals. The letter stated that the divorce had been finalized via a video link from their respective facilities. There were no assets to divide. There was no custody battle for the children who were now safe in a foster home with a family that wanted to adopt them. There was only the division of blame. And then came the sentencing. Because they had admitted to a pattern of behavior, because they had shown zero remorse, and because they had wasted the court's time trying to frame each other, the judge had increased the sentences. Jessica Jefferson, 25 years, no parole for 20. Dante Jefferson, 20 years, no parole for 15. I folded the letter. 20 years. My son would be 55 years old when he saw the sky without bars across it. I would be 92. Or dead. I looked at the lake. The water was still reflecting the orange and purple of the setting sun. A loon called out in the distance, a lonely, haunting sound. I felt a ghost standing next to me. The ghost of the father I used to be. He was weeping. He was mourning the little boy who used to sit on his lap and steer the truck. But I wasn't that father anymore. I was the man who had survived. I struck a match. I held the flame to the corner of Arthur's letter. I watched the paper curl and blacken the words, turning to ash. I dropped it into the metal bucket I kept for citronella candles and watched it burn until there was nothing left but dust. I didn't need to keep the record. I didn't need to read it again. It was done. The cancer had been cut out. The wound was closed. Ike. I looked up. Beatrice was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at the smoke rising from the bucket. She knew. She always knew. Was that news? She asked softly. I stood up and walked down the steps. I took her hands in mine. They were warm and smelled of tomato vines and earth. It was just some paperwork, B, I said, just closing the file. She searched my face. She looked for the pain, for the regret, but I didn't let her see it. I gave her the only thing she needed to see. I gave her the face of the husband who would burn the world down to keep her warm. Is it over? She asked. It is finished, I said. They can't hurt us. They can't hurt anyone ever again. She let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging with relief. She leaned into me, resting her head on my chest. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the steady beat of her heart. That heart was still beating because I had acted. That heart was still beating because I hadn't hesitated. And that was worth the price of a son. Come on, I said. Let's take a walk. The sun is going down. We walked down the gravel path toward the water. We walked slowly, matching each other's pace. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. We had spent 40 years talking, planning, raising a family, building a life. Now we were in the epilogue, and the epilogue was quiet. We reached the dock. The wooden planks were weathered and gray, worn smooth by the elements. We stood at the end, looking out over the water. The sun was a ball of fire dipping below the tree line on the opposite shore, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson. It was beautiful. It was the kind of beauty you have to stop and pay attention to because it changes every second. I looked at Beatrice. The dying light caught the silver in her hair, turning it into a halo. She was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She wasn't thinking about Dante. She wasn't thinking about the poison. She was thinking about the sunset. She was thinking about the tomatoes. She was thinking about us. I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. We were old. Our bodies were slowing down. The world had tried to chew us up and spit us out. Our own blood had turned against us. But we were still here. We were standing. I thought about the legacy I had wanted to leave. I thought about the name Jefferson living on. But I realized that a legacy isn't a name. It isn't a piece of land or a bank account. A legacy is the way you love. A legacy is the way you protect the things that matter. My legacy was standing right next to me, holding my hand. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a twilight sky of deep indigo. The first stars began to appear, pinpricks of light in the vastness. I turned to my wife. Ready to go in, I asked. Not yet, she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. Just a little longer. We stayed there until the stars filled the sky. Two old people on a dock in the middle of nowhere. No one knew where we were. No one knew our names. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly free. The past was ash in a bucket. The future was the hand in mine. And that was enough. Blood may tie us together, but loyalty defines a family. I spent 40 years building a legacy thinking I was securing my son's future only to realize I was financing my own destruction. Greed is a parasite. It eats through love history and gratitude until nothing remains but a hollow shell. My greatest victory wasn't the wealth I accumulated, but the courage to cut off the infected limb to save the heart. Protect those who truly cherish you and never hesitate to close the door on those who only cherish what you can give them. What do you think about the price Dante paid for his greed? Was Isaiah right to let the law take his own son, or is blood always thicker than water? I read every single comment. So tell me your honest opinion below. If this story of ultimate justice kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on that notification bell because the next story I am going to share involves a betrayal so deep it makes this one look like a playground fight. Thank you for watching.